Hello friends. This is Fictional Vortex. How are you all? So in this video, we will see what if Naruto had Jinchuuriki of the darkness. Summary. What if during the second Chunin exam, when Orochimaru sealed the Kyuubi's power behind the five-pronged seal, he released what it was holding back, something darker. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Naruto Uzumaki was not having a good week. First, his so-called sensei decided to enroll him and his team into the biannual Chunin exam that had made its way to Konoha, and that was after he encountered a team of genin from Tsunade village hidden in the sand. And spending a couple weeks after their first C-ranked mission resting. The trio seemed a little off, what with the redhead constantly having an insane undertone in his eyes. And one of them dressed as some kind of cat, wearing a mummy on his back, though the blonde girl seemed normal enough, and if he were honest, hot, much easier on the eyes than his female teammate. When they got to the academy to register on the day of the exam, Sasuke, one of the last Uchiha and Naruto's male teammate, was challenged by another Konoha genin, Rock Lee. Being a genin with a full year's experience, Lee was able to crush Sasuke with ease, much to Naruto's secret enjoyment. Once the fight was over, the team moved on upstairs, and ran into Kakashi, their sensei, though Naruto held a scowl back the entire time Kakashi told them about how the exams could only be taken as teams. Once inside, the first test was revealed to be a written test, something Naruto would admit was not his strong suit. Given the lack of education the academy teachers shamelessly never gave him. Lacking the resource to cheat, he patiently waited for the test to end, though he felt eyes staring at him the entire time. And when he looked back, he noticed the girl from the only sound team looking at him, though she averted her eyes quickly after. Once the exam was over, a new proctor came into the room via crashing through the window in a large sheet. After the pleasantries were done, she led them to Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death. And the site of where we find our hero, 2 days into the test. Sasuke stood on a large tree branch, frozen in fear. A large snake was closing in on his location, its jaw wide open. Sasuke closed his eyes, waiting for his end. When it didn't come, he slowly opened his eyes and saw Naruto holding the snake back, a light red aura surrounding him, and his head down, his hair covering his eyes. When he lifted his head, his trademark whiskers were darker and thicker. His hair seemed spikier than usual, and his eyes, while usually blue, were a feral red. Sasuke heard, "What's wrong, are you afraid?" Sasuke noticed Naruto grinning, and even his teeth looked more feral. Naruto then took out a kunai, flipped into reverse grip, and stabbed the snake right in the eye, making it vanish, showing it was a summon. Sasuke stared as Naruto looked at the blood on his hands, and his grin almost seemed to grow. What no one but Naruto heard was a voice telling him to relish it, but it was faint, as if something was getting in its way. Yes, that is the right way. Kill more. He turned to see the summoner, Akusa Kunoichi with an elongated tongue. He recognized her as the woman who snuck up to the proctor, but then he saw her eye. It was yellow and had a slit, like a snake's. He growled out, "Well, if it isn't Orochimaru, as if your pet snake wasn't a big enough giveaway." The now revealed Orochimaru chuckled as he peeled away the fake face and said, "Well, I'm surprised a little genin like you knows about me. I would have figured my name would have been wiped out of the record." Naruto merely smirked and said, "Why should I tell you? How I know doesn't matter, not to you." Naruto charged, his speed higher than Orochimaru expected. He noticed Naruto's eyes and thought, the Kyuubi Jinchuuriki, he could be troublesome. He then lashed out with his tongue, wrapping the appendage around Naruto's neck, just when the genin was about to plunge his claws into his neck. Orochimaru performed a few hand signs, and the fingertips of his right hand glowed as purple flames appeared. Naruto struggled to try and remove the offending appendage from his neck, before he felt something slam into his stomach, and he heard, "Five-pronged seal." Naruto felt the chakra of his tenet subside as his mind started to slip out of consciousness. But the voice returned, seemingly clearer, "Son. Orochimaru." Yu looked down his tongue at the unconscious genin, and merely tossed him off the branch, letting him plummet to the forest floor below. Sakura, Naruto's female teammate, saw him fall and tried to use a kunai to make him stick to the tree. Sadly, it missed the hem of his jumpsuit by an inch, and all Sakura and Sasuke could do was watch as he fell. Naruto's mindscape. Naruto's eyes opened to see what looked like a sewer. Except something was wrong. It was slowly changing, the walls and floor getting covered in what looked like tentacles. He heard a voice reverberate through the halls, "Kit, watch out." Naruto then felt a gust of wind blast through the hallway, pushing him back, and out of his mind. Clearing, now would be a good time to play Monster by Skillet. Naruto opened his eyes, and he heard, "Looks like our lucky day, we found a tree hugger to get rid of. Hell, if he has a scroll it'd be icing on the cake. Hey, you notice something? He looks a lot like that bastard Yondaime." "You're right, this will make killing him more fun." Naruto tried to move, only to find his right leg busted. "Damn it, I can't feel the fox's power anymore. What did Orochimaru do to me?" He looked up to see 3 teams, all of them bearing the symbol of Iwa on their headbands. He saw them slowly pull kunai out of their pouches, and Naruto could only think, "God damn it, is this gonna be the end of me? If I get out of this, I'm gonna kill Hatake for pushing this on us. That can be Ara indeed." Naruto felt time around slow, and he wondered, what the hell is going on? He felt a cold feeling rise out of him. And to his surprise, 2 snake-like appendages formed behind him, the voice from before shouting, "At last, IFEEEEEDDDD." He felt time start to speed up as he was lifted off the ground. "Through you, I will display my power." One of the Iwa genin shouted, "Oh God, what the hell is that?" He was quickly grabbed by one of the snakes, and screamed as it plunged into his chest, tore up through his throat and came out of his mouth, the still beating heart in its mouth, which it quickly swallowed. The others tried to run, only for multiple pairs of yellow eyes to look at them through the darkness of the forest. They slowly started to back away, only for the yellow eyes to move forward, showing a horde of little imps, each looking generic while they were led as a whole by 5. Each looking like they had a purpose. "Through you, I am born." The first had a club in its hand, and was oddly dressed like it was wearing a potato sack. It grabbed one of the genin and proceeded to bash his head in. The second had something on her back which she pulled to the front and aimed at a trio of genin. She merely said, "Death to the commies," before she started to tear them apart via her machine gun. She only got 3 of them, while the third grabbed one of the genin that tried to run, and Naruto barely saw that it wore a gentleman's suit before it pulled the ripcord on its back, blowing up itself and the genin, causing his body parts to splatter all over the clearing. The fourth paralyzed another genin by shocking him with electric tongs connected to a battery on its back. Then plunged the tongs right into his mouth, and fried his brain. The fifth was by far the oddest. It wore a dead cat on its head, and wore what looked like a flag like a strange toga. The flag itself had red, blue and white strips, British flag, Union Jack, and he saw it grab one of the few genin left, and crawl up its back, before ripping the genin's throat out using one of its claws. "You are my puppet." The first snake threw the dead genin at the last one alive, causing him to crash into a tree. He tried to move, only to feel something impale him in the chest. He looked down to see a spiked tentacle and he said, "Are you, Yami?" And he then felt it rip out of him, taking his heart with it. Naruto's eyes widened as a large black hole erupted in the center of the clearing, sucking in the dead bodies, before exploding in a manner that caused bits to fly everywhere. He felt a surge of pain erupt in his leg as he felt it knit back together. And he finally felt his feet touch the ground. Naruto backs away as he shouts, "What the fuck just happened? Where did you guys come from? What the fuck are you?" The imp with the cat on his head chuckled and said, "Well, hello monkey. Nice to see ya. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but for now, you have more important things to take care of, boss. We got you some old weapons that can help with the darkness. Now you gotta get going." The imp made a motion to come forward, and 2 did, a box in their hands that had a dark feeling wafting off it. Naruto opened the box to see a katana that was slightly chipped on its edge, a sign on constant use. The purple symbols near the handle were oddly kanji, but none he recognized. The handle of the blade was mostly normal, but he pommel and the area just under the blade almost looked like they were covered in eggs. The second weapon had a handle grip, and was two tubes stuck together. It had two pieces of metal sticking out at the top, and he saw that there were 4 glowing slits that were down the side of each of the barrels. Kusanagi, an arm of the Night One. Naruto looked at them and asked, "What are these? They feel familiar." The darklings chuckled, and the leader, from Naruto's viewpoint, said, "Ah, they should monkey. These weapons were once held by humans, but had a touch of the darkness itself in them. The markings you see on them are actually fragments of the darkness. They used to be cursed, but over time, their curse broke, which is good because they were a bit of a pain." Naruto raised an eyebrow at the mention of a curse, and asked, "What curse?" The darkling chuckled again, and said, "The sword was used to kill 10,000 innocent souls, and whoever wielded it had to kill the same number of evil souls. And with each day that a victim wasn't claimed, it would take a year off your life. It's been redeemed, and now its power is unrestrained. The gun, on the other hand, whoever used it didn't live past the age of 30, but that was broken by its last user living to 31, then dying right after." He then shook his head and said, "Why are we just standing around? We need to get going." Naruto nodded and said, "You might wanna get on my back then. I can move a lot faster if I don't need to wait for you." He held the sword and gun in his hands, as the darkling leapt onto his shoulder. The others vanished into the darkness of the canopy as the duo jumped into the tree branches. Clearing while Naruto was attacked by the Iwa Nin. Sakura felt a chill go down her spine. After Naruto fell to his death, she struggled to get Sasuke somewhere safe, after Orochimaru bit him on the neck, causing a hickey to appear on his neck. Since then, he's been unconscious. Hence why she had to drag him away. She managed to find a clearing that had a tree with an opening in its roots. Even though she placed traps around the area, everything had her on edge, every little noise. She even threw a kunai at a squirrel because it got too close. Sakura could feel her eyes starting to droop due to lack of sleep. She soon nodded off for a few seconds, only to snap awake as she heard, "Wake up, Sasuke, we're here to kill him." Sakura turned and saw the trio of Oto genin that attacked Kabuto before the first exam. The two males of the group looked at her with lust, the mummy with bloodlust. The other, it almost made her want to back away. The female of the team, on the other hand, looked apprehensive, and looked as if she were about to run. Sakura stood up, though her knees were about to buckle from exhaustion. The second male, Zaku, moved forward, only for the first, Dosu, to hold his arm out in front of him and said something that shook Sakura to the core. "Hold it. A booby trap isn't very good if it's noticed before it's sprung." Dosu looked over the clearing and said, "Grass has uprooted, soil overturned, it's far too obvious. Why, Owl'll have to work a lot harder than that to get the drop on us." He then stepped forward, not noticing Sakura grin, and cut a rope hidden behind her. Dosu heard something crashing through the trees, only to turn and see a large log going right for them. Dosu smirked and he said, "Still not enough." He slammed his right fist right into the log, causing a bracer to be shown. He merely flicked the side of it, and the log was destroyed. Sakura really started to feel fear, as her trump card was wiped out easily. She felt a hand on her hair as it was pulled back harshly, and looked back to see the girl, Kin. Her hand clenching her hair. Zaku grinned and said, "Nice one, Kin. Keep her still while we kill her little boy toy over there." Kin kept an impassive visage, while mentally she was fuming. "This disgusting little bitch. The feel of her hair. It's much better than mine. No doubt she spends so much time caring for it than her training. And she has the nerve to push around that cute blonde like he was worthless." She pulled the hair in her hand harder, and noticed Sakura taking a kunai out of her pouch. Kin scoffed as she said, "What is that gonna do?" Sakura smirked as she said, "Oh, it's not for you." She then surprised all involved by cutting her hair. The looks of surprise were mostly on Team 10, the second generation Ino Shikacho, who were hiding in the bushes nearby. Zaku cursed as he noticed Sakura escaping and pointed his palm in her direction. He let a murderous grin cross his face, only for a green-clad leg to strike him across the face. Naruto jumped across the tree branches, the darkling pointing out directions from atop his head. Naruto, slightly curious, asked, "How do you know where they are?" His companion chuckled and said, That's because I can sense the darkness, it's telling me where to lead you, monkey. Not sure why it's being so helpful, but I wouldn't complain too much. Naruto nodded, and to his surprise, his companion shouted, "Move it, monkey. I can sense a strong dark force ahead of us." Sasuke slowly picked himself up, a swirl of purple chakra surrounding him. His face and left arm were covered in black flame-like markings. He looked toward Sakura and asked, "Who did this to you?" Sakura shivered at his flat tone, but Zaku, in his pride, said, "We did it." Sasuke merely looked at the trio, and said, "Well then. You three will be the first to taste my new power." He vanished, only to appear in front of Dosu, and gave him a quick kick to the stomach, along with a punch to the chest, causing the mummy to hit a tree hard, knocking him out. He then turned toward Zaku, who in a bout of fear, pointed the holes in his palms straight at Sasuke, and shouted his worst jutsu, Extreme Decapitating Airwave. A blast of wind tore out of his arms, headed right for Sasuke, who was gone when the smoke cleared. Zaku breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "Blew him away." He then felt his arms get pulled behind him as he heard, "Blew who away?" Sasuke started to pull Zaku's arms back as he said, "You seem proud of these, perhaps I should get rid of them." He started to pull harder, until a sickening snap was heard, the telltale sign that Zaku's arms were broken. Zaku fell in a heap as Sasuke let go of his arms. Sasuke then, much to the apprehension of all in the clearing, set his sights on Kin, who was painfully leaning on one of the trees in the area, due to damage to her back. Ino thought it was smart to hijack her body using her mind transfer jutsu, and held a kunai to her neck, thinking Kin's team would give in. Sadly, Zaku was the one that callously blasted her into the tree, Ino having jumped out of her body before impact. She closed her eyes as she heard his footsteps getting closer, Sasuke drawing a kunai as he did so, and she mentally begged, "Oh God, please, I beg you, someone help me." She waited for the blade to pierce her flesh, but the feeling never came. Instead, she heard a metallic clang, and slowly opened her eyes. Her face tinted red as she saw the blonde from the first exam in front of her, holding a sword and fending off the crazed Uchiha. ND pointed a strange weapon at the Uchiha's face. Naruto glared and said, "That's enough, Sasuke, you see she's beaten, stop." Despite the situation, Sasuke grinned and said, "Make me dead last. With this power, I surpass you." Naruto narrowed his eyes as he said, "You should not have said that." A dark feeling pressed itself onto everyone as the dark snakes returned to Naruto's shoulders. Kin shivered in fear, and Naruto looked back at her, grinned and said, "It's all right, I'll keep you safe." She felt her blush creep back onto her face, while Naruto turned back and heard, "He dares think he is superior to me. Silence him." Naruto mentally shook his head as he thought, "Sorry, I need him alive, for now." He flipped the sword so he was holding it in reverse grip, and bashed the pommel against Sasuke's head, disorienting him as one of the snakes grabbed him and slammed him into the ground. Sasuke's marks receded as he was no longer conscious, and the genin breathed a sigh of relief. Neji and Tenten, who were up in a tree since Sasuke woke up, came down as Tenten ogled over Naruto's sword and asked, "Where did you hide such a sword? You didn't have it before." Naruto merely chuckled nervously as he said, "Well, it was a gift from a friend." He then heard Ino shriek as she screamed, "What the hell is that? Some kind of monkey?" He turned to where she was pointing. G as one of the other darklings came into the clearing holding 3 scrolls, the blood on them showing it was from the Iwa genin he had slaughtered, or rather, the darkness slaughtered. He gladly took the scrolls, and the darkling vanished into black smoke. Naruto then felt the snakes on his shoulders disperse as a fist collided against his head. A voice yelled, "Naruto Baka. Look what you did to Sasuke-kun." Naruto turned to her with a glare, and in a tone he didn't know he had, he said, "Shut the fuck up, you annoying little bitch. In case you didn't notice, your precious Sasuke was out of control. What if he turned on you, huh? Tell me that. Could your sorry ass do something to stop him? I think the fuck not." He then pistol whipped Sakura in the back of the head when she took a breath to start yelling. He then grumbled, "How the fuck we didn't get ambushed because of her voice, I'll never know." Many of the genin were shocked to hear him say that, Ino among them, as she saw Rst hand how much of a crush the blonde had for the Pinkett. Lee slowly stood up as he noticed two Oto genin on the ground, the third looking at Naruto with a blush on her face, Sakura on the ground unconscious. And his teammates looking at Naruto. He then asked, "What has happened here?" Naruto merely shook his head and said, "Not something you want to hear. Trust me." Naruto then searched his pouch, and to his relief, found the heaven scroll Sasuke was going to throw away. He then looked at the scrolls from the Iwa Genin, 2 earth and 1 heaven. He then looked to Team 10 and Team Guy and said, "So, which ones do you need?" Tenten and Ino looked at as if he were crazy, and Tenten asked, "Well, not to be ungrateful, but why?" Naruto gave a slight smile as he said, "Well, Lee came to the rescue while I was indisposed, as it were. He didn't have to, but he did it anyway. Ino, you and your team no doubt tried to help as well. Now I don't want to hear any refusal, we have a spare of each. Consider this paying you guys back for helping. And I hate to hold on to a debt." Shikamaru sighed and said, "All right, we do need an earth scroll." Neji merely sighed as well and said, "And we are in need of a heaven scroll." They both noticed their needed scroll heading right for them, and when they caught them, they noticed Naruto walking over to Kin, and he asked, "Are you hurt anywhere?" She shyly nodded and said, "My back, it was hurt when I got blasted into this tree." She noticed Naruto make 2 clones, which picked up his teammates as he slowly picked her up, carefully placing her on his back. He then turned and looked at the others, "See you at the tower." He then turned back and whispered to Kin, "We're gonna have to go by tree branch, so if your back hurts because of it, sorry in advance." Kin blushed as she thought, "Why is he being so nice to me?" Naruto was having his own mental conversation as he jumped through the trees, his clones following close behind. "What are you doing to me? I would never act so nasty toward my teammates, even if they deserve it." Naruto shook his head clear as he thought, "That's not the damn point. All I need to do is get to Chunin, and I'll never have to deal with them again. And I can't do that if I bash their heads in." He felt the darkness laugh, it sending a shiver down his spine. "Do not fret, with my power, you will surpass all of these weak mortals." Naruto mentally sighed and thought, "Thank you. You're far nicer than I expected you to be." He could hear it chuckle again as it said, "You can thank my past host Jackie. Through him, I learned that it is better to work with, rather than against." Naruto nodded, but was broken out of his thoughts as he felt Kin hold on to him tighter, causing him to stop and ask, "You feeling all right?" She nodded and said, "I am, thank you for caring." Naruto smiled and said, "All right, though, you can tell me if something is bothering you. I have experience in dealing with bad teammates." Kin tightened her grip as she said, "Later, okay." Naruto nodded and took off once again. He nearly kicked himself and asked, "Does the beautiful girl have a name?" Kin blushed and said, "Kintsuchi." Naruto smiled and said, "Naruto Uzumaki." What they didn't realize was that a certain red-haired girl that would have been attacked by a bear below heard them, and in her anger, ran right past the bear. The tower. Naruto opened the door to the tower, and noticed the darkling hiding in the shadows. He then said, "Guess I should open them now." He then had his clones dump Sakura and Sasuke on the floor, then the clones opened the scrolls. The inside showed a seal in the middle, and the clones dropped the scrolls on the ground. They landed as a plume of smoke erupted from them, and a familiar figure came out of the smoke. The tan skin and scar above the nose proved it was Iruka, Naruto's old academy teacher. Iruka smirked and said, "Naruto, it's good to see you and your team make it here. So, who the girl on your back?" "Your girlfriend. Glad to see you break that crush on Sakura." Kin and Naruto looked at each other and their faces turned deep red as Naruto said, "Iruka-sensei." Iruka laughed, until he saw Sasuke and Sakura on the floor and he said, "What happened to them?" Naruto scowled and said, "Sasuke tried to go too far. And Sakura still has yet to break her own delusions." Iruka shared his scowl as he said, "This is why I did not want Kakashi to enter you three. I trust you Naruto, but I don't trust Sasuke and Sakura. What has Kakashi done training-wise?" Naruto scowled and said, "Teamwork and tree climbing." Iruka looked at him and said, "And?" Naruto sneered and said, "There is nothing else. Sakura just sits all day staring at Sasuke like he's Kami on Earth, and Sasuke gets pulled away to who knows where." That's why I'm glad we got in this, gives me a chance to break away from them. Iruka nodded, and said, I see, I should tell Hokage-sama about Kakashi's blatant disregard. Naruto smirked and said, don't, not yet anyway. Iruka looked at him expecting an answer. But all he got was a smirk. Naruto then said, are there any medics here? She gonna need them for her back. Iruka then nodded and led them out of the room, no one remembering Sasuke and Sakura were still in the room. Medic room. Naruto carefully placed Kin on the bed, and the medic started to apply the medical jutsu needed. Kin felt a wave of relief pass through her, and she sighed in contentment. Naruto couldn't help but blush at her peaceful expression, and he heard, you care for her, don't you? He felt his blush deepen as he thought, wah, what are you talking about? I just met her. He heard it say, don't lie, Jackie was the same way with his precious Jenny. Naruto dreaded the answer, and he asked, what happened? She died. Naruto froze, and for a reason he didn't understand. He had an image of Kin dead run through his mind, and it made his heart wrench. He noticed the medic was done, and he said, I took care of her back, she should rest or a day or two to ensure she heals naturally. Naruto then picked her up bridal style, and said, thank you. The medic merely nodded, and as he watched them walk away, thought, to be young and in love. Naruto then carried her to a separate room, careful not to make any noise as he could hear Sakura's screeching down the hall. He gently laid her down on the bed, and was about to walk away when he felt her hand around his wrist. He looked back as she asked, could you stay with me, please? Naruto smiled and said, sure. He sat on a nearby chair, and the two slowly started to talk. Dosu and Zaku were trembling with fear. Orochimaru found them passed out in the forest, and he was looking at them with intent to kill. He growled out, you had a simple job, to kill the Uchiha. And you failed me, and worse off, your own teammate is gone, she could reveal our invasion plans. What the hell did you do? Zaku, beside himself, said, she was weak. What good was she besides a bit of entertainment? Orochimaru's scowl deepened and he said, pathetic. I sent you three here for a reason, to represent our village, and you do this. Be gone. A large noise came from the bushes behind them, and two boa constrictors entrapped them both, before crushing their bodies. The snakes then devoured the bodies and vanished back to their realm, leaving Orochimaru to think, this could be a problem. Kin was shivering at the amount of Ki that erupted in the room as she said, I hope those two die in that forest, they made me there. She turned away as she placed her hands near her waist. And Naruto understood what she meant. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and said, don't worry, if I see them again, there won't be enough to place in a matchbox. Kin smiled, and in a bold move, pressed her lips against his. Naruto felt his face heat up as his eyes widened. Soon the duo broke apart for need of air, and Naruto asked, what was that for? Kin looked away, her hands covering her cheeks as she said, I don't know, I just moved on my own. The door was soon kicked open as Naruto scowled, but to his surprise it was a red-haired girl, with a cat and bird masked Anbu in tow. She was trying to get out of their grip, but Naruto said, easy, she must want something. The Anbu let go, and the girl said, my name is Karen Uzumaki. And who the hell are you? Thinking you can go around using my clan's name. She pointed an accusing finger, while Naruto merely said, I'm using it because it's my name. It's the only one I ever had. Karen grew a tick mark on her head as she said, you can't be an Uzumaki because we all have red hair. You're blonde. Kin cleared her throat, getting the attention drawn to her as she said, he could just have his father's hair, right? Karen paused and said, that does make sense, but there's still the fact that the only Uzumaki that's been anywhere near Konoha in the last 20 years has been Uzumaki Kushina. And from what I saw of old bingo books, the only person with that shade of blonde would be the Yondaime. It took all of 5 seconds for the words to sink in, and Naruto shouted, what the fuck? Sarutobi, I am gonna kill your wrinkly old ass, you lying son of a bitch. Karen and the Anbu covered their ears, and Karen said, geez, what caused that? Naruto snarled as he said, I've been asking him for years about my family, and he's lied over and over again. He tells me, I never knew them, or some other bullshit. To the surprise of everyone in the room, Naruto wrapped Karen in a hug, and said, "I'm just glad I have even a shred of my family." Karen hugged him back, and Kin said to the Anbu, "You two might wanna go, everything's fine here." The Anbu nodded, though the cat-masked Anbu thought, "Damn you Sarutobi, keeping a kid from knowing about his family." Neiko and Tori found the Hokage sitting in his office, and Sarutobi felt a bit of ki coming from Neiko. Only for it to vanish a second later, he then thought, I wonder what set her off. 2 days later, Naruto awoke to find Kin clutching one arm, while Karen was holding the other. Naruto CK led as he remembered what he and his Kusen talked about after the Anbu left. Flashback. Karen sat on the edge of the bed, and said, "So, you never knew about any other Uzumaki?" "Anywhere." Naruto shook his head, and said, "No. As far as I knew, I was the only one." Karen then took off her glasses slowly, an action Naruto couldn't help but find alluring, and she said, "Well, I wonder just how we're related. And if it's far enough, perhaps you and I could." Kin paled and said, "Whoa there Red, cool yourself off, you two could be cousins for Kami's sake." Karen smirked and said, "Oh. So, Oon's like you just want him for yourself, don't you?" Kin blushed and tried to look away, and Naruto heard, My, you certainly are in a pickle." Naruto mentally groaned and thought, "The hell are you doing?" He heard it chuckle and say, "Just pushing what's there to the surface. It's what I've been doing the whole time." Naruto blushed as he thought, "So, the fact that they're bickering like this. And I've been acting more angry then is because you're pushing our desires to the surface." How? He heard it chuckle, but it slithered back into the depths of his mind. Naruto then noticed Karen and Kin still arguing, and he said, "Karen-san, could you tell me more about our clan?" Karen smiled as she started to explain about their clan, their rumored longevity, and even more about the bloodline that some thought they had. Flashback end. Naruto thought to himself, "To think, we're connected to the Rakuto Sennin. Could I possibly have the Rinnegan?" He heard the darkness laugh, and it said, "Perhaps." The fox held back a lot, me included. "It is possible." "What do you mean?" "I could understand if the seal interfered, but how could Kyuubi do it?" "The fox kept me separate from you, hidden behind the seal. I have been with you your whole life, yet all I could do was watch, well no more." Naruto smirked and thought, "Well, it's nice to know someone in that seal has my back." He felt the darkness nod before it went to sleep, and Naruto felt Kin and Karen stir, both glaring at each other as they woke up, and Naruto said, Now, no need to get testy, I'm sure it's time we get up." The two nodded, though they kept glaring at each other at each possible moment. Naruto got up and tied his headband around his waist similar to how Lee did it, and placed the Kusanagi on his left side, and the arm of the knight on his right. It left his hair to fall down naturally, making Karen say, "Wow, get rid of that jumpsuit and whiskers, and you will look like the Yondaime." Naruto nervously scratched his cheek, and something dawned on him, and he said, "How did you get in the tower? Did your team get a scroll already?" Karen smirked and said, "They did, but thought they could ditch me and sneak a peek at the scrolls. I managed to steal them in time and drag their asses here. Then well, you know the rest." Naruto merely nodded as he left his jacket open, exposing his black t-shirt, and said, "We sadly need to get to arena floor, pretty sure the 5 days are up." The two followed him out, and, to their displeasure, they heard, "There you are Naruto Baka. We've been looking all over the place for you. We have to go meet with everyone." Naruto turned and scowled at his pink-haired teammate, and said, "How about you fuck off? I was going that way anyway. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to go before I puke from looking at you." He then turned away, leaving a shocked Sasuke and Sakura behind, while Kin and Karen followed him, satisfied smirks on their faces. The trio finally got down to the exam hall, where the rest of the genin were waiting. Karen saw her teammates glaring at her, but she merely shrugged it off and gave Naruto a kiss on the cheek, and said, "See you later Naruto-kun." Kin gave her a slight glare as Karen walked back to her team, and sighed as she saw her team wasn't in the room. Orochimaru must have gotten to them. Oh well, that's what they get. Kin then gave Naruto a kiss on his other cheek, and said, "I'll see you later, okay?" Naruto nodded and whispered, "All right, I'll have some of the darklings keep watch for you, never know right?" Kin smiled as she said, okay. She then walked out of the room, a certain Neko Anbu following her, and several pairs of yellow eyes following them. Sarutobi looked at Naruto, and he was baffled. How on earth? He must have met those two during the exam, but a survival test is hardly the place for romance. I'll talk to him after the test. He then noticed Naruto giving him a harsh glare. And for some reason, an image of a giant snake seemed to appear behind him. He felt a cold chill go down his spine, and he turned his attention to the other genin. Naruto stood in between his teammates, his hands twitching in annoyance as he heard, "But Sasuke-kun, you think you can fight your condition, what if, shut up Sakura. I'm not gonna waste a chance to fight against strong opponents. If you don't forfeit I will do it for you." Naruto placed a hand over both of their mouths and said, "You both mind shutting the hell up? If Sasuke wants to, let his sorry ass get kicked. Maybe then he'll learn. You on the other should just shut up." He then turned back and faced forward, just in time to see Kabuto about to forfeit, but he noticed him. Get a look from the sound Jonin hiding in a corner of the room, whose appearance made Naruto nearly slap himself, and Hayate, seeing the odd number of genin, said, "It seems we have an odd number of genin this time around. This means there will be one who will be doing 2 fights. Does anyone volunteer?" Naruto raised his hand and said, "I'll do it." Hayate nodded, though Sarutobi looked at him with a critical eye. Naruto smirked as he noticed one of the boards above the statue move to reveal an electronic board, names cycling through until it stopped on 2. Sasuke Uchiha vs Akado Yoroi. Sakura looks at the board and thinks, Sasuke-kun can't fight, not this early. Naruto was thinking, this just reeks of the council's doing, wanting to show off in front of the foreign ninja. As Naruto and the other genin went up to the catwalk, Kakashi said to Sasuke, "You can't use your chakra in this match, or the seal will react. If that happens, the match will be stopped, regardless." Sasuke merely nodded his head and continued to go toward the center. Hayate, the proctor for the preliminaries, raised his hand in the air and looked at both competitors before saying, "Are both fighters ready?" At the confirmation, he lowered his arm in a chopping motion and said, "Begin." He then jumped back, so he wouldn't be hit by the fighters. Sasuke began the match by rushing toward Yoroi, kunai in hand. Naruto thought, he's desperate, he won't win that way. Yoroi dodged the kunai swipes, and struck out with his right hand glowing blue, in a manner similar to a chakra scalpel. He grabbed Sasuke by the shirt, and he noticed he was getting weaker. He managed to get Yoroi off of him, and managed to get some distance from his opponent. Sasuke's vision was getting blurry, and saw Yoroi rushing him. Yoroi grabbed Sasuke by the hair, and then the Uchiha noticed. He said, "You're stealing my chakra." Yoroi chuckled and said, "Yes, I am able to steal the chakra of my opponent. And add it to myself, you're finished." Sasuke, knowing he couldn't use chakra or jutsu, got a flash of when he fought Lee before the exam started. He remembered how he fought. Sasuke then ducked down under Yoroi's guard, and gave him a heel kick to the face, launching him upward. Lee saw what he was doing and thought, he had his Sharingan active when we fought, but to see him perform it is something else. Naruto thought, still, the Uchiha are copycats, but to steal Lee's hard work is wrong. Sasuke saw the reactions, and said, "I may have taken the first part, but from here on out, it's all original." He paralyzed Yoroi by using his index and middle finger. He then swung his right arm at Yoroi's face, which was blocked by the arm. Using the momentum, Sasuke swung his right leg to kick Yoroi's stomach, sending him straight to the ground. Seeing Yoroi knocked out, Hayate called, "Winner, Sasuke Uchiha." Yoroi was picked out of the crater he made on impact. While Sasuke fell on his ass, with Kakashi already supporting him, he said, "Let's get that mark sealed away, shall we?" Kakashi then shunshined away with Sasuke. Naruto shot them a glare as he heard, "Such favoritism. Disgusting. I can agree on that." The board began again as the names cycled through until it stopped at 2. Shino Aburame vs Kuroishi, OC teammate for Karen. As Shino calmly walked down the catwalk, he spied Naruto's sword and said, "My Kikaichu are antsy." As if they recognized that blade. Naruto gave a feral grin and said, "Interesting that you would say that, Shino. Perhaps I'll show you its power when it comes to my turn." Shino oddly smirked and said, I would not mind that at all, Naruto-san. Naruto turned back as Shino walked to the floor. Naruto then thought, what is the blade's power? He heard the darkness chuckle and say, the power of hell's flies. The hell does that mean? You'll see, watch your friend. Naruto looked down as he saw Shino's opponent. He wore the traditional Kusa uniform, and had dark black hair. Shino himself merely kept a cool face behind his sunglasses. Hayate looked at them both to see if they were ready. At their nods, he says, then let the match begin. As he jumped back, Kuro attacked first, charging in with a kunai in hand. He made a swipe for Shino's neck, only for Shino to attack his open stomach. Kuro moved away, unaware that something slipped onto him. Kuro grabbed a second kunai out of his pouch, but paused as he heard a loud buzzing noise. He looked behind him to see a large collection of insects, looking at him as if he were the next meal. Naruto grinned as he thought, that's right, the Aburame are living hives, so Kusanagi must be able to unleash swarms. Correct. The Kusanagi is able to use a fraction of my power. The power of Hell's Swarm. I am definitely liking this partnership. Kuro shivered as he backed away from the swarm, only to hear the buzzing again from behind. Shino stoically said, you have two choices, forfeit, or be devoured by my swarm. Kuro felt a sweat drop from his chin as he said, I forfeit. Hayate then said, winner, Shino Aburame. Shino called back the hive, and calmly walked up the stairs. As he passed by Naruto, Naruto said, not bad, Shino. Shino merely smirked behind his coat as the board spun through names. Kankuro vs. Masumi Tsurugi. Naruto saw the makeup-wearing Sangenin, and Kabuto's other teammate walk down to the center stage. Kankuro held a confident smirk, his opponent's face unreadable due to the glasses and the mask. Hayate looked at them both and asked, are both fighters ready? Seeing their confirmations, he swung his arm down, and said, then let the match begin. And he then jumped out of the way. Kankuro pulled the package off of his back, saying, this will be over quickly. Masumi then rushed at Kankuro, and in a strange way, wrapped up Kankuro, who only had time to throw the bundle away from himself. Masumi chuckled as he said, I am able to stretch my body using my chakra, turning my bones softer. Give up now, or I will snap your neck. Kankuro merely scoffed and said, yeah right, you don't have the guts. Masumi appeared to have an angry expression, and with a single move, snapped Kankuro's neck. Sakura said in surprise, he actually broke it. Masumi sneered, thinking he won, as he saw Kankuro's head go limp. He then heard the head chuckle, and he along with all but the Sand Shinobi had wide eyes as they saw his head snap up. Part of his face missing, revealing what looked like a wooden person. Kankuro's clothing was ripped at the sides, as 6 arms sprang out, and wrapped around Masumi in a manner that was very familiar. The now revealed puppet laughed, before saying in Kankuro's voice, well, that was fun, I wonder how soft your bones would get if I broke them all. The puppet squeezed Masumi tightly, and with an audible crack, broke every bone from the neck down. The bundle Kankuro carried started to unravel, showing the real Kankuro. Hayate said, winner, Kankuro. Naruto thought. He hid himself inside bundle, and controlled the puppet, making it look like it was him, not a bad idea. Masumi was carried off by the medics, and the board went through the names again. This time it landed on 2 names the Leaf Ninja knew they would never hear the end of. Sakura Haruno vs Ino Yamanaka. Naruto tuned out the fight as he thought, so, Kusanagi is a blade that creates a swarm of insects. But what does the other weapon do? It's able to fire and set ration of my own energy. The slits indicate how many shots you get on each side. Okay, that's cool, but how exactly does it work? Do you see the 2 caps on the top? Pull them back, point in the general direction of your target, and pull the trigger. Okay, but what if I miss? It doesn't, ever. Naruto grinned as he watched Sakura and Ino's match degraded into a catfight. He then felt a weight on his arm, and turned to see Karen. She purred and said, hello there, miss me. Naruto chuckled and said, hasn't been that long, though believe me, I prefer yours and Kin-chan's company over some people. She noticed the venom in his voice, and they felt a swirl of wind behind them and Naruto said, hello Kakashi. How was doting over Sasuke? Kakashi hid a scowl behind his mask as he said, "That's Kakashi-sensei to you, Naruto. And Sasuke is fine, his curse mark has been sealed. He would have had it fixed if someone told me he was here early." Naruto scowled and said, "Well, maybe if you actually gave a shit about more than one person on this team, then maybe you would have checked up on how we were." Karen noticed the tension and said, "Sorry to interrupt, but it seems my turn is up." Naruto turned to see everyone from Konoha gaping at Karen's last name, even Kakashi. Karen walked down as Shikamaru said, "Oh great, I gotta fight a girl, and she's related to that troublesome blonde." Naruto smirked and said, "You should know better, Shikamaru, pissing off a woman is bad for your health." Sarutobi was a little frightened. Shit, of all times an Uzumaki had to show up now. What if she leads him away from the village? Hayate, unaware of his thoughts, said, "Are you two ready?" Shikamaru groaned, while Karen smirked. Hayate then said, "Well then, let the match begin." Hayate jumped away, while Karen wasted no time. She reached into her pouch and grabbed a pair of smoke bombs and tossed them on the ground, covering the entire arena in a very thick smoke. From within, they heard Shikamaru crying out in pain, and a loud thud. The smoke cleared to reveal Karen standing over Shikamaru, who was crumpled in a heap. Naruto smirked and said, "Nicely done, Karen-chan." Karen blushed and said, "Thanks, Naruto-kun." Naruto heard Kakashi clear his throat behind him, and he said, "You shouldn't cheer for a ninja that's not from your village." Naruto bit back a growl and said, "She's family, why shouldn't I? Besides, I doubt you hold family in any sort of regard, do you?" Kakashi bit his tongue, holding back what he would have said, and instead looked at the board. Sabaku no Tamari vs Tenten. Naruto hugged Karen as she made her way back up the stairs as he asked, "How did you do it? I couldn't see a thing." Karen giggled and said, "I have our clan's sensor abilities, I can sense anyone by their signature, so fighting in conditions like thick smoke doesn't matter. I'm the only one that can even use these kinds of smoke bombs outside of the Hyuga." Naruto chuckled and said, "Impressive." Karen blushed, but gasped as Tenten was cut up by Temari's wind. Naruto cursed as he saw her fall, seeing that she would land on Temari's fan. Without thinking, he called a demon arm to wrap around Tenten, and lower her gently as he jumped to the arena floor. He noticed her look at him. He pulled her closer, and he saw a light blush on her face. Naruto saw medics arriving to take her away, and he passed her off to them. Everyone looked at him in amazement as he said, "What the hell are you all looking at?" Sarutobi paled as he thought, could that be the Kyuubi's influence? Is the seal starting to weaken? Naruto noticed the board start to go again, and saw his and the one name he would enjoy. Naruto Uzumaki vs Kiba Inuzuka. Naruto smirked as he said, "Move it, mutt, we have a schedule to keep." Kiba jumped down from the catwalk, Akamaru on his head. Naruto's grin grew, and Akamaru jumped off Kiba's head and backed against the wall. Kiba then said, "What's the matter, boy? It's just the dead last." Naruto then chuckled and said, "Your pet should take your advice. It would be good for him." Kiba smirked and said, "So you know you can't win, good." Naruto shook his head and said, "I was speaking to Akamaru, you idiot." The Jonin couldn't help but laugh, even Kurenai, though she then said, "Kakashi, Naruto may have that strange power, but he can't beat Kiba." Naruto smirked and said, "You have a bit of a point. It's too bright in here." Hayate then said, "If you two are ready, then let the match begin." Hayate jumped back as the lights started to dim, no one thinking to look up, or he would have seen a light-killer darkling taking electricity from the lights, making them dim. Naruto felt the bliss of the shadows as the creeper heads emerged from his shoulders, black wisps of dark essence rolling off him like smoke. "That's better." Kiba was frightened. No, past that, he was on his ass in fear. Kiba said, his voice broken with fear, what are you?" Naruto smirked and said, "Your worst nightmare." Kiba seized up, and promptly passed out. Hayate merely blinked as the lights stopped dimming, and Naruto was seen without his extra appendages. Hayate then said, I guess the winner is Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto scoffed and said, "How disappointing." Kakashi was trembling, as were many of the Konoha nin. Gaara on the other hand, kept a cool outside, while on the inside, He kept hearing Shukaku inside screaming at him to stay away. Naruto noticed many of the Konoha nin unconsciously backing away, except for Shino, who said, "It seems you weren't able to use your blade yet." A shame. Naruto merely shook his head and said, "If I use it, someone's gonna die." Shino said nothing as Naruto walked back to his sensei. Sakura thankfully was still asleep from her fight with Ino. Naruto merely gave Kakashi a side glance as he expected Kakashi to make some kind of remark. Hearing none, he turned away, only for Kurenai to ask, "Kakashi, what have you taught him?" That genjutsu was complicated, but effective. Naruto smirked and said, "Sorry to burst his already too large bubble, but Scarecrow here has taught my team the bare minimum." This caught all the Leaf's Jonin's attention, making Kakashi avert eye contact. Kurenai then asked, "What do you mean, the bare minimum?" Sasuke seemed like he was trained, and we obviously didn't get a chance to see you. Naruto scoffed and said, "You forget Sakura's crappy performance. All he had me and Sakura do were teamwork exercises, not sure about Sasuke, seeing as the two of them go off together so often." Kakashi felt the eyes of every Leaf nin in the room directed at him, a heavy glare from Sarutobi and one even more so from Anko. He tried to say, Now, stop making up stories, Naruto. It's not polite." Naruto scoffed and said, "No, reading your porn everywhere you go is not polite." Kurenai's glare intensified as she said, "Really? So Naruto, is it true that Kakashi has taught you nothing? Not even how to make that genjutsu?" Naruto nodded, but whispered in her ear, "Except, it wasn't a genjutsu." Kurenai looked at him in fear, as they noticed the board stopping on two names. Naruto Uzumaki vs. Kabuto Yakushi. Naruto let a dark smirk cross his face as he walked down the catwalk. Hinata was visibly shivering next to Kurenai as he passed, and even Ino and Choji backed away. Though Shikamaru said, "Troublesome blonde." Naruto smirked and said, "Aren't I always?" Naruto made it to the floor, and he noticed Kabuto smirking. Naruto crossed his arms and said, "Why are you so smug?" Kabuto chuckled and said, "Your sad attempt at genjutsu may have scared that dog boy, but it won't scare me that easily. I know all about you, remember?" Naruto started to laugh, and he said, "Really? You think those little cards will help you? But let me ask you something, what is mankind's biggest fear?" Kabuto shrugged and said, "How should I know?" "Death." Naruto grinned and said, "Close." Hayate, seeing them ready, said, "Well then, if there are no objections, then let the match begin." Kabuto jumped away, but noticed the lights starting to dim again. Naruto chuckled, almost sounding insane as he said, "Mankind's biggest fear is the darkness." The lights completely shut off, and all anyone could see was the three sets of yellow eyes that glowed in the dark. Kabuto backed away from the eyes, only to turn as he felt something behind him. And he screamed as he saw hundreds of smaller pairs of yellow eyes. He then felt something pressed against the back of his head, and heard a whisper, "Death is a befitting punishment for a spy." Kabuto froze, and a loud bang was heard. The lights turned back on, and everyone gasped as they saw Kabuto's body, minus a portion of the head. Sarutobi was about to yell at Naruto for killing a Leaf Nin, until he saw Naruto pick up Kabuto's leaf handband, which now had a music note as its symbol, showing that it was under genjutsu. Naruto threw it toward them as he merely walked back up the catwalk, everyone becoming very weary of him now. Karen on the other hand glonked him as she said, "Wow, that was cool. Looks like we each have something that helps us see in the dark. I'm sure that will be helpful later." Naruto let a light tint of red dust his cheeks, while Sakura, who was awakened by the shot, said, "You nasty bitch, he's your cousin, isn't he? Guess freaks deserve each other." She froze as she felt the cold steel of Kusanagi on her throat, and the barrels of arm of the knight against her forehead. She saw Naruto's cold glare and shivered as he said, "Don't you ever insult her, you trash. We may be family, but she's far more attractive than you, and stronger." Sakura looked to be near tears, and Kakashi said, "Naruto, that's enough. Now apologize." Naruto glared at him, and barely noticed Lee about to be attacked by Gaara's sand, while Lee was standing still. He cursed but saw that Guy stepped in, making him relax. Naruto saw the medics carry Lee away, and he heard Neji say, What a fool, it was his destiny for him to lose if this is the result. Naruto bit back his tongue, while Karen said, what an arrogant prick. Kakashi gave her a small glare as he said, watch your mouth Kusa-nin, he's from the Hyuga clan, an elite of the village. Naruto hit him in the ribs with his elbow and said, she's right you know, a prick like that has no right to talk down on someone, and neither do you. Kakashi glared, but averted his yes when he saw Naruto reach for his gun. The board spun until it landed on two names that made all the Leaf Nin flinch. Hinata Hyuga versus Neji Hyuga. Naruto started to show a little fear, something Karen noticed. And she slipped her hand in his. He glanced at her, a kind smile on his face. Naruto looked down at Hinata's match, hypnotized as he watched the exchange, the two Hyuga fighting it out using their family style. The Juken, gentle fist. Karen smiled as she noticed how he was looking at Hinata, and she whispered, you know, the Uzumaki clan is in very few numbers, no doubt the CRA will be used on you. Naruto blushed, but paled as he saw Neji charging in for the kill. Naruto felt his anger rise, and even the darkness reacted, tear and mutilate. The lights dimmed and Naruto jumped down the railing. The creeper head snarling, a demon arm wrapped around Neji's waist. They lifted Neji into the air, as the medics rushed out to take her to the infirmary. They paused as they saw the demon arm and creeper heads, but Naruto turned his head and said, go, now. They nervously moved and grabbed Hinata and placed her on the stretcher, Kurenai following. Surut. Obi paled as he noticed one of the heads turned toward him, and the image from before was clear. My Kami, what the hell is that? Neji lost all color in his skin as Naruto said, in a voice that me. NGLY blended his and that of the darkness, you will suffer for this. If we face you, we will devour your soul. Everyone froze at the pure killing intent, and they saw Naruto's eyes, glowing bright yellow. The lights flashed back, and Naruto's extra appendages disappeared, causing Neji to fall on his ass. Naruto snarled as he left, Karen running after him. Sarutobi turned to Kakashi and said, you have a lot of explaining to do. Kakashi sighed and said, I know. Naruto snarled as he punched a wall in the hallway, his fist causing an indent. Jack the Darkling appeared next to him and said, oi monkey. You seem a bit steamed. Don't worry, I got a few of the guys watching over your little Hyuga. If anyone comes after her, they'll be torn apart. We got your back. Naruto smiled, his longer hair making it seem more feral, and he said, that's good. Could you keep an eye on the prelims, to see who I'll be dealing with in the finals? Jacko nodded and said, sure thing monkey. He then disappeared in the shadows, just as Karen caught up to him. She rubbed his shoulders as she said, you got your darklings covering her, don't you? Naruto nodded and Karen said, then she'll be fine. Naruto relaxed and said, yeah, they might not look it, but they've got numbers. And something else, we should go find Kin-chan. Karen nearly scowled, but it was forgotten as they heard gunfire. Naruto immediately running down the hall, and nearly had his head taken off by a stray bullet. He saw one of the gunner darklings put her gun behind her back and bowed. Kin got out from around a corner and said, what took you? I've had Oto Nin after me, this latest one was the fourth. Naruto looked around and saw that there were 4 bodies in the hallway, each riddled with bullet holes. Naruto smirked and said, come on, you'll be safer at my place. He then froze as he turned to Karen and said, what about you? Don't you have to go back to Kusa until the finals? Karen smirked as she cut a slash on her headband, an action mirrored by Kin. Karen then held his hand and said, family is far more important to me. I finally have some sense of it, and I won't let that go. Naruto smiled, and said, thank you. You're right, family is the most important thing in life. He heard the darkness chuckle, and he thought, what's so funny? Jackie had that same feeling. Except he ran a mafia. Naruto smiled as he felt Kin and Karen hold each of his hands, and he thought, my life has changed for the better. He suddenly felt a pull on his mind, and woke up to see he was in front of Kyuubi's cage. He saw that fragile steel bars had crisscrossed the imposing bars that were there before. He saw the red eyes of the beast open as he gave it a glare. Kyuubi gave one right back as it said, it's about time I was able to get you down here. We need to talk. Naruto snarled as he said, "Why should I talk to you? Your whole being here has been nothing but one problem after another. I know you've been suppressing my power. Why did you hide the darkness from me?" Kyuubi growled as it said, "I did you a favor, the darken. Is not something you want in your life." Naruto slashed a demon arm against the bars of the cage, as he shouted, "And who are you to decide that? You, that took everything from me. If it weren't for you, I would have had my mother and father. Without you, my life wouldn't be a living hell. And you expect me to believe you did me a favor?" Kyuubi gave him a harsh glare as it said, "Are you done, you ungrateful little prick? I know the darkness better than anyone." Naruto winced as he felt the wind nearly blast him back. He was surprised to see the Kyuubi's form shrink, until he heard footsteps approaching the bars. To his surprise, the figure was dressed in a fancy suit, and had long black hair. Naruto heard the darkness surround them as it said, "Jackie, it's been so long." Jackie scoffed and said, "Not long enough, you son of a bitch." Naruto nearly felt his mind crack as he said, "Will someone please explain what the hell is going on?" Jackie turned to him and said, "Fine, I'll break it down for you. Years ago, before this ninja age of yours, I was once the host of the darkness, just like you. I had its power, and it felt great, but, because of this thing, I had to watch as the love of my life got killed. As I hunted down the men that did it, I tried to find ways to control it, but all I managed was to bury it. Time passed as I kept it inside, until I was forced to let it out. In my path to tearing down the organization that tried to take it from me, I wound up in hell, the darkness lost to me. It must have crept its way to you when you were born, when I was sealed into you. I felt the darkness in you, and tried to keep it from giving you the same pain, but that snake's seal ruined that." Naruto looked saddened as he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." He then thought of something. "But wait, the darkness has been helping me." Jackie looked generally surprised as he asked, "The hell? Maybe all this time away from humans fixed it." My aunt's store once said that humans drove it insane, so maybe, because it's been gone for so many years, it must have mellowed out. Naruto nodded. It said it learned from you. Irregardless, it's been helpful so far. And maybe, you can help me learn how to fight with it. Jackie grinned and said, "You've been doing great so far, kid. Though, I'd work on your aim, won't get another chance to do that again. But I have to say, it had a style to it on its own." Naruto then thought of something and said, "Okay, but, how did you become the Kyuubi?" Jackie sighed and said, "That is a story for another time, kid. I'll tell y'all later." Naruto felt himself vanish from his mind, Jackie thinking, for another time indeed. Naruto opened his eyes to see Kin and Karen sitting next to him at the hospital. To his surprise, Jacko was speaking to them. "Monkey's gonna have his hands full with this one. He's gotta deal with that Hyuga that hurt his princess." Kin scowled and said, "Really? So he told you he likes the Hyuga girl?" Jacko waves his claws in a defensive manner as he said, "Oi, don't look at me, I just came out of his noggin. I know just about very thing there is to know about him." Naruto had a tick mark as he placed a hand on Jacko's head, and said, "Who said you could tell them that?" Jacko gulped, and Kin said, "It's all right, Karen told me how you looked at her during her fight. And of course, about the fact that the two of you might." She let a dark blush creep over her face, while Karen merely grinned. Naruto gripped the sheets of his hospital bed as he said, "We have a month to train, right?" Kin and Karen nodded, and Naruto said, "Well then, we have a lot work to do." Naruto slipped into his clothes as he got out of his hospital bed, and Karen said, "I know one thing we're doing, getting you some new clothes." Naruto sighed and said, "I know, but this was the only thing the stores would sell to me." Kin looked at the jumpsuit in disgust and said, "It makes you a target." Naruto scowled and said, "Guess that was the point. The only good thing would be that it helped make my stealth so good. I was able to paint the Hokage faces in this thing. And no one noticed till I finished." Kin and Karen broke into a fit of giggles, and the trio left the room, Naruto having gun and sword once again on his belt. As they made their way out, Naruto checked out at the receptionist's desk, and heard from behind, "Well Naruto, nice to see you up and about." Naruto turned and saw Kakashi, still casually holding his book for all to see. Karen and Kin gave the scarecrow a glare, and Naruto asked, "Any reason you're here?" "Oh wait, I'm guessing Sasuke must be here. I can't imagine you would be here for anyone else." Kakashi gave a glare, and said, "Haha, very funny Naruto. I came to see you too. I wanted to ask you about that strange power of yours." Naruto snorted and said, "Right, so you can hope to tell poor Sasuke about it." As if. The trio tried to walk away, only for Kakashi to grab Naruto's shoulder, and say, "I wasn't finished. Lord Hokage would also like to speak to you about that power." Naruto shrugged off his hand and said, "Well, it will take a lot for me to even look at that old prick, let alone speak to him." Kakashi's glare intensified as he said, "Show some respect to the Hokage Genin. Keep up your attitude and I might not even give you a training scroll." Naruto grabbed Kakashi by the neck as he said, "What, thought I was going to come beg you for training or something? Well, fuck you." Karen and Kin, along with all in the lobby of the hospital, had their mouths wide open. A whistle split the silence, and Anko walked into the lobby and said, "Damn Gaki. Gave him one hell of a tongue lashing, that's for sure." Kakashi glared at her, and Naruto said, "I'd quit that look, Scarecrow, lest you want to lose that eye too." Anko let a snicker pass her lips, and she said, "Let's talk in private, and bring your girlfriends." The trio blushed, and as they left, Kakashi thought, that power won't save you during the exams, it will be during the day, and Sasuke will win over you, Naruto. As he should. Anko dragged the trio into her favorite dango shop, though Naruto noticed a waiter giving him, as well as Anko, the same glare as the other villagers. Naruto leveled a glare right back, making the man shrink away. Naruto smirked as he heard, "So, Karen, right? I see you are an Uzumaki, just like the Gaki here." Karen nodded, and said, "I am. And I was hoping to help Naruto-kun prepare for his match." Anko gained a sly smirk as she said, "Oh, so it's Naruto-kun, huh, you sly devil. I wonder though, how closely related are you two?" Karen had a light bulb go off in her head, and she pulled what looked to be results out of her pocket. She then said, "I had this done while Naruto-kun was out cold." She opened it, and Kin, Anko and Naruto looked over her shoulder. And to their shock, she read, "We are related, but it seems we're very distant cousins. There's only a 5% match, and by most standards, that's pushing the word related." Anko let a sly look cross her face again as she said, Well, seems the two Uzumaki brats might have some of their own." Naruto and Karen had the decency to blush, though Karen had a lost look in her eyes. Naruto sighed and said, "Well, that's one issue solved, yet another pops up." Anko raised an eyebrow and asked, "Oh, and what would that be?" Naruto let a smirk cross his face as he asked, "Anko-san. I'm no fool, I doubt that no matter what I do, me becoming Chunin is slim, depending on who's judging." Anko slowly nodded, well aware of what he meant. Naruto continued, "So, I was hoping that regardless if I do or not, to be taken off Team 7. Anko let a look of sadness cross her eyes, and she said, "Listen Gaki, I can tell that Kakashi is a crappy teacher. Hell, the fact you made it here by yourself, without his help not only shows how neglectful he is, but it also shows your potential." Naruto chuckled and said, "Why thank you Anko-san, and, perhaps, you could help." Karen and Kin had an idea of what it was, and Naruto said, "Perhaps, after the exams are over, if I fail to make Chunin, or if I do, I was hoping, myself, Karen-chan, and Kin-chan would be put together on a team, and, with your acceptance of course, you would act as our Jonin-sensei." Anko let a bit of pink on her cheeks, though she chuckled and said, "You have some gall Gaki, but you've impressed me with how you took out that Kabuto kid, so, sure, what the hell. Well, while we're here, let's celebrate. Waiter, 4 plates of dango and sake." Naruto noticed the waiter nod, only to see him look at Anko with disdain, making Naruto give a silent glare. Naruto calmly sat as the girls start to talk, and he noticed the waiter coming back with the sake, and placed the bottles on the table. As the waiter moved away and Kin took her bottle, Naruto grabbed her wrist, and pulled the Aoten from his belt, and primed it, pointing it in the waiter's direction. He then said, "What do you think you were trying to pull?" The waiter was nervous, Stories of what happened to Kabuto having already started to float around the village. Naruto slowly turned his head in the waiter direction, and said, "Putting bleach in sake. How pathetic. Now either you bring fresh bottles, or I redecorate the walls with your fucking brain." The waiter gulped, and Kin asked, "How did you know there was bleach in these bottles?" Naruto tapped his nose and said, "Good sense of smell." He heard both the darkness and Jackie laugh, and Jackie said, "Holy shit kid, that's one way to make a guy piss himself. You remind me of me when I was younger, before I became the Dawn." Naruto mentally smirked and thought, "Thanks Jackie, coming from you, that's one hell of a compliment." He noticed the waiter coming back, and set fresh bottles, the previous one having already been thrown away. Anko let a small smile cross her face. The food arrived, this time without incident. Hokage's office. Sarutobi had his face on his desk, and he asked, "He really said that? Are you sure?" Kakashi sighed and said, "Yes, word for word." Sarutobi shook in fear as the image assaulted his mind again, and he thought, "What on earth has he become?" Kakashi sighed and said, "What are we going to do with him?" Sarutobi picked his head up and glared as he said, "No, a better question is what am I going to do with you?" Kakashi looked shocked in his one eye as Sarutobi continued, "You were supposed to be the sensei of Squad 7, not Sasuke Uchiha alone. What the hell were you thinking?" Kakashi flinched, but Sarutobi said, No excuses. How could things turn out this way? I didn't think another Uzumaki would be around after Uzushiogakure was destroyed in the war." Kakashi shook his head and said, "I was surprised about Kushina-sama. I thought she was the last." Sarutobi nodded and said, "So did I just hope she doesn't convince him to leave the village, or even worse, turn on us." Kakashi flinched, knowing he might have helped grease the wheels of Naruto's choice. Neither noticed a pair of eyes watching from the shadows. Its lack of a chakra signature made it invisible to the Anbu around the room. Naruto's apartment. Naruto sat on his bed, his eyes closed, yet he could see everything Jacko saw, and heard it all. His fists were clenched tight, and he heard Karen come in, and she asked, "Everything okay?" Naruto nearly snarled and said, "I know what we'll do for this little month. Pay a visit to our home." Karen looked at him for a moment before it clicked. She whispered, "Uzushiogakure." Naruto nodded, and said, "And we should move, I can barely stand this place right now." Karen nodded, and went in the other room to fetch Kin. Konoha streets. Anko patted her full stomach after enjoying the meal with her soon-to-be students, the thought of it making her stop, and nearly cry. They wanted me. Out of all the other Jonin, they picked me. Why? She felt her fists clench as she remembered the whispers she heard when she became a Jonin. I hope they never give her a team. Who in their right mind would let that snake whore teach children? Why the Hokage didn't throw her away like the trash she is, I'll never know. She must have used her filthy body to have charmed her way to become Jonin. Anko merely pushed the thoughts aside as she thought, "These bastards, I hope Naruto-kun shows them all who's wrong." She felt her curse mark react to her anger, and she slinked back to her apartment, tears falling down her face. A thought crossed her mind, "I get the feeling, he'll make them pay." Uzushiogakure 1 week later. Naruto, Karen, and Kin stood in the middle of the village's library, searching through the books in order to find out more on the clan. Naruto pulled a book from a shelf, and caused a wall to slide open next to it. He heard Jackie groan, "Really?" Was like watching Scooby-Doo again. Ignoring the thought, he looked at the book he pulled, Myth of the Raikudo Sennin. The hell? A secret room. Naruto went down the stairway, Karen and Kin following. As they went down the passageway, seals started to glow along the walls, and Karen noticed that the seals glowed as she and Naruto passed. They must be reacting to our blood, it's why Kin-san isn't triggering any. As they reached the end of the passageway, Naruto saw a chamber with a large seal in the middle, and a slab at the end. Naruto walked towards it as he read, "Only those whose eyes hold the Rinnegan may read this message and know the secret to this chamber." Karen looked at the slab, and asked, "Naruto-kun, what are you reading? Is it that slab, because there's nothing on it?" Naruto walked over to the slab, walking to the center of the seal, as he continued, "Those who can read this, walk to the enter of the room, there, the paths of pain shall be opened." Naruto stepped into the middle of the seal, causing it to activate, and he felt a large burning sensation in his eyes. He felt his body changing, and Karen and Kin saw various seals breaking on his skin. Even the Gogyo, Fuin Orochimaru placed over the Shiki Fuin broke, restoring the seal to its proper function. A bright light filled the chamber, and when it dimmed, Naruto stood in the center, changed. He turned toward Karen, and said, "We need to see that library." A Megakure Akatsuki base. A man with orange hair was facing away from the tower, out into the rain that blanketed the village. He felt something off in the distance. Something familiar. He opened his eyes, showing purple concentric circles taking up the entirety of his eyes. His body was covered in an overcoat that was black with red clouds. His face had a multitude of black piercings, and a large amount of paper collected behind him. The paper parted to reveal a woman in her mid-30s, her blue hair framing her angelic face. The only decoration a single paper flower. She too wore an overcoat, same as other, and she said, "Pain-sama, does something trouble you?" Pain shook his head and said, "I felt something Conan, off in the distance." It felt familiar. Conan looked at him in surprise and said, "What could it mean? Is it possible someone other than you has the Rinnegan?" Pain closed his eyes, and said, "It can't be. Only the Uzumaki clan has ever held the Rinnegan. And the only Uzumaki besides myself is, the Kyuubi Jinchuuriki. Pain-sama, what if he has the Rinnegan?" Pain merely looked to the horizon as he said, "It is possible, Conan. A slim chance, but possible." Conan looked downcast as she asked, "Pain-sama, no, Nagato, would you go so far as to kill the only family you have left?" Pain merely shook his head and said, "For peace, sacrifices must be made, when the time comes." Conan could only look at her longtime friend in disbelief. Hidden base. Orochimaru looked down at the body of Kabuto, as it was laid out on a slab, and said, "Curse that Uzumaki brat. Without Kabuto, I need someone to start the genjutsu." He then heard, I never knew how much I was important." He turned and saw Kabuto standing behind a pillar, and he asked, "How on earth?" He turned back to the body on the slab, and saw it change into that of an aim ninja. "You used your dead soul jutsu, didn't you?" Kabuto smirked, and said, "Of course Orochimaru-sama, the forest provided me with plenty of material. Having it stand in for me made it easy to see Naruto-kun's power." Orochimaru merely smirked and said, "Well now, it seems the plan can proceed as scheduled. Soon, the Leaf Village will be nothing but ash." Time skip day of the finals. The Chunin exam stadium was bustling with civilians and ninja alike. The daimyos of the different nations sat in the VIP box, Anbu keeping watch from a distance. The winners of the preliminaries stood single file in the middle of the arena, Neji. Noticing Naruto's absence, said, "It seems that fool won't make it here after all." He felt glares from Tamari, and oddly enough Gaara, while Kankuro said, "Easy there Hyuga, he'll show." A guy like that wouldn't be a no-show. Neji scoffed and looked away from the line, and Genma, the proctor for the portion of the exam, said, "Stand straight and look to the front, we have a lot of VIPs here." He then held up a sign, and said, "All right, for those who forgot, here is the lineup for the matches." First match. Neji Hyuga vs Naruto Uzumaki. Second match. Gaara Sabaku vs Sasuke Uchiha. Third match. Shino Aburame vs Kankuro Sabaku. Fourth match. Tamari Sabaku vs Karen Uzumaki. Fifth match. Choji Akamichi vs winner of fourth match. In the stands, Shikamaru said, "Oh man. I still feel my head pounding from my mom's cooking iron." Ino scoffed at him and said, "That's what you get for acting so lazy." Sakura looked around and said, "So now where's the baka? Probably so scared of losing without those freaky power of his." Ino looked at her and said, "Sakura. He's still your teammate. Sure he might act strange, but at least he's kind. He helped Tenten out during her match. And he helped Hinata." Shikamaru sighed and said, "As much as it pains me to admit it, Sakura is right on one thing." Ino looked at him in shock, and Sakura let a smug look cross her face. Behind them, Kiba asked, "What do you mean?" Shikamaru explained, "That power of his is like my clan jutsu, it needs the shadows to work right, and in an open field like this, while the sun's out. That's putting a limit on his power, if he can use it at all." They heard someone clap behind them, and they turned to see Kin, though her clothes changed. Rather than her old sound uniform, she now wore a black kimono with loose sleeves, a red swirl on the back, and her long hair was no longer a long ponytail, it was 2 shoulder-length ponytails, each wrapped up in bandages, and ended with a gold ring on the end to keep it together. How Soifin has hers. Kin then smirked and said, you have a point, in bright areas like this, Naruto-kun can't use those powers, but then again, that's not all he focused on. Shikamaru sighed again. What a drag, I should have known that blonde, so, when's he gonna show up? Kin merely smirked and said, sorry, that would be telling. Enko sat with Kurenai in a different section of the stands, and Kurenai looked at her and asked, you seem chipper today, something going on? Enko smirked and said, well, let's just say I do not wanna be that Hyuga kid. Kurenai raised an eyebrow and asked, well, he did show that weird power of his, and he has been gone for the month. He must have went training with that cousin of his. Enko's smirk grew wider as she thought, if only you knew. The immortal Chunin, Azumo and Kotetsu heard people making bets around them, and Azumo asked, think Uzumaki has a shot? Kotetsu nodded. After what I heard happened in the preliminaries, yeah, I think so. Only problem is the weather, too bright out here. Now if this were held in Kumo or AIM it'd be different. Azumo nodded, and said, but then again, no one has seen him around town since the preliminaries, he might have some new tricks. Down in the arena, Genma then said, alright, will the participants of the first match come forward? The rest of you head up to the balcony until your match is called. The others walked toward the balcony, though Gaara stopped, turned back and said, pray he doesn't show Hyuga, he's like me. A monster that won't quit. Neji shivered, though smirked and said, he's not even here, so why should I pray? Gaara started to grip his head, and said, mother is screaming, he's here. The real monster is here. People started to look around, hoping to spot a speck of orange. Kin smirked, and pointed upward, and Shikamaru looked in the direction she was pointing, and he shouted, holy shit. He's up there. People looked up, and to their amazement, someone was floating over the arena, as if he were standing on air. The figure slowly descended, and they couldn't make out who it was. Until he dropped to the ground. The figure had long red hair, with streaks of black and yellow mixed into it. He stood at an imposing 6 feet even, and his body was covered in a brown and ragged cloak, think the cloak Asura wears after his first return. When the figure looked up, his eyes were shown to be purple, and in the design of concentric circles, the rings spreading out like a ripple in a pond. But the fact that surprised everyone the most, was the dark whisker marks on his cheeks. Ino shouted out, is that Naruto? He's hot. She then blushed, as many were looking at her, though in the balcony. Tamari felt her face heat up, and thought, she's right though, to think he was the same shrimp we met when we first came here. She saw Gaara walk into the room, and she noticed, his stare wasn't leaving Naruto's form. She thought, is it because he can tell how strong he is, or something else? Neji glared and said, so, you managed to get a change in looks, not that it will do you any good. This match is already mine. Naruto grinned, and in a deeper voice, said, and what exactly has determined that? If I may ask. Neji let a smirk cross his face, and he said, fate has decided this match. To his shock, and the shock of the Hyuga in the stands, Naruto started to laugh. Neji had a tick mark on his head and he said, what is so funny? Naruto slowly stopped laughing, and he said, you think fate has any sway here? Foolish punk. Relying on fate like a crutch, I might as well break it, and your spirit. Sarutobi was shivering in his seat, his eyes filled with fear. The cage looked over and asked, something wrong? Sarutobi merely shook it off and said, no, nothing at all, just expecting some good matches. The cage nodded and said, of course. What with my son facing the Uchiha next, it's bound to impress the crowd. Sarutobi gave a side glance, but said, of course. In his mind however, what on earth? That hair, those eyes. He can't possibly have obtained the Rinnegan. Neji scowled and said, fate controls everything. To go against it is pointless. It seems I will have to prove it to you. He triggered his Byakugan. The veins on the side of his face that led to his eyes bulged, the mark of activation. Naruto started to laugh harder, and Neji clenched his fists, but steeled himself and slid into his clan's taijutsu stance. Naruto calmly stood, and Genma said, "Well then, let the first match of the Chunin exam finals begin." Play Kingdom Hearts 2 Ost 13th Struggle. Neji felt his anger rise as he saw Naruto do nothing but smirk. Naruto then said, "Show me your strength. Show it, before I crush it, and you." Neji, in a fit of rage, charged, ready to use Juken to destroy Naruto's heart. Naruto's smirk grew as he uttered two words, Shinra Tensei. Heavenly subjugation of the omnipresent god. Neji felt something push against him, and the crowd saw a orb surround Naruto's body. Temari looked in shock, as she thought, that wasn't wind, it had to have been something else. Naruto raised his hand and pushed it forward, causing the orb to spread out, and Neji to go flying. Neji managed to correct himself, and he said, "What was that?" Naruto smirked, and said, "A gift from the eyes of God." Neji shivered as he saw Naruto's eyes, and he stammered out, "What is that?" Naruto smirked and said, "The eyes of God, the Rinnegan, the first and strongest of the Sandaidojutsu, 3 great-eyed techniques, eyes that surpass even those of you Hyugas." The Hyuga that sat in the stands had looked aghast, and some of the elders were calling out for Naruto's head. Hiashi, Hinata's father, felt a tug on his kimono's sleeve, and he looked down to see his youngest daughter, Hanabi, look up at him and ask, "Father, is what he's saying true? That his eyes are better than ours?" Hiashi sighed and said, "There is a myth that the Rakuto Sennin had such eyes. If what Naruto says is true, then he really does have eyes that surpass ours." The elders look at Hiashi with disgust, while Hinata thought, "Please, go easy on Neji-Nisan, Naruto-Nisama." She then felt a cough rip through her chest, the pain inflicted by Neji still affecting her. Hiba moved her up the stairs, and an Anbu in a black cloak started to apply medical jutsu. Neji shivered in fear, and Naruto grinned and said, "That's right, tremble, for now your hour of judgment has arrived, and I shall be the one to deliver it to you." He closed his eyes, human path, he snapped them open and vanished, in a blur not even Guy would be able to keep up with, and Neji felt his torso nearly give in. A thought crossed his mind, was that one punch? He felt himself moved through the air, only for something to wrap around his ankle. He could barely see a chain around his ankle, before being dragged along the ground, his face kissing the dirt. Anko started to laugh, a certain redhead next to her. Anko turned and said, "You two really worked during the month, huh?" Karen giggled and said, "We certainly have. Naruto Koi took to our clan's techniques easily. I wasn't so lucky, but I did manage to learn a few, lesser versions." Anko looked down as Naruto was dragging Neji around the field, and she asked, "Do many of those techniques involve his eyes?" Karen shook her head and said, "That would be telling." Anko noticed Karen's clothes were different from last time she saw her. Like Kin, she wore a black kimono, except hers, rather than having the sleeves be loose. Her sleeves were tied down, her wrists and hands covered in fingerless gloves. Her long red hair was now tied into a ponytail, the hair on the top her head was split into 2 styles. One half slightly spiky, the other half smooth. Her hair hid the same spiral that Kin had on her kimono. Anko whistled and said, "Wow, looks like Naruto wasn't the only one to get into shape." Karen giggled and said, "Thank you Anko-sensei." Anko froze, and thought, she actually said it. Anko let a smile cross her face, and heard the crowd gasp, making her look back at the arena. Neji looked worse for wear. Being dragged around in the dirt by only a chain can do that. Naruto was using the chain as a whip, and wrapped it around his chest like a sash. Naruto kept a smirk on his face as he said, "How does it feel?" "That for once, it's you who's being beaten down." Neji picked himself off the ground, getting to his feet, and he said, "It is my fate to win this match. You claim you have the eyes of God, but I know that's fake." Naruto stopped smirking, and said, "Do you think so?" Neji let an arrogant smirk cross his face as he said, "I know it. My Byakugan can see everything. And all I see is the dead last." Naruto shook his head and said, "Well then, if you will hold on to fate, then I guess I will have to break you, permanently. A large pressure filled the arena. And Naruto said, you should have given up, you should not have shown your face here. Now, you will be crushed, just as an ant is crushed by a dragon. Asura Path. One of the rings in Naruto's eyes glowed, and to the shock of those in the stands, Naruto threw off his cloak, showing he wore no shirt underneath, and 2 silver arms sprouted from his shoulders. Neji looked on his fear as he backed away. Naruto let a maniacal grin cross his face as the extra arms changed. One turned into chainsaw, another into a flamethrower, while the last 2 turned into claws. Neji felt himself freeze, and a cloud passed over the stadium. When its shadow reached Naruto, his eyes glowed yellow, and the creeper heads came out. Neji nearly pissed himself at the sight. And as Naruto slowly walked, the stadium was dead silent, but when the cloud passed, the creeper heads vanished, and Naruto struck. Using a normal arm, he summoned another chain, and wrapped it around Neji's waist. Pulling him in, using the claws, he grabbed Neji's shoulders, and aimed the flamethrower at his chin, the chainsaw at his waist. Naruto smirked and said, any last words? Neji paled, but grabbed a flash bomb from his pocket, and detonated it in Naruto's face, Neji being spared the flash because he shut his eyes and his Byakugan. Naruto dropped Neji, and thought, that son of a bitch. I'm gonna tear him apart. Diva Path. Naruto glared at Neji, and got an idea. He then smirked and said, you Hyuga and your pride, it's almost sinful. Not the first sin this village caused either. Neji glared as he tried to pick himself up, and said, what are you talking about dead last? This village is, Naruto cut him off, oh but it has. Have you ever looked at he uniforms for the Chunin and Jonin of this village? Ever see the little spiral that decorates them? Many of the Chunin and Jonin looked at their uniforms, and saw what he meant. On each of their uniforms, they saw the spiral. And Naruto continued, that spiral is a symbol of a long since past alliance this village had with another. Sarutobi was starting to feel uneasy, as Naruto continued, that village was Uzushiogakure, the village hidden in the whirlpool, and the home of my clan, the Uzumaki. Naruto closed his eyes, and continued, about a couple decades ago, Uzushiio was in line to become the 6th grade ninja village. With their power over seals and water ninjutsu, it wasn't hard in those days. Unfortunately, the other villages had a problem with this, namely Iwa. At the time, Konoha had an alliance with Uzushiio, but one day, the alliance was cut, right before Iwa led an invasion and destroyed Uzushiio. Many of the Chunin looked shocked, and many of the Jonin gave Naruto a sympathetic look. While the rookie genin looked on in shock, Naruto snarled as he said, it was only by luck that my mother, Kushina Uzumaki, was sent to this village before the attack. I wasn't even aware of what happened to my clan until I went to the village itself. Neji then got to his feet as he said, no doubt they were weak, if they needed help, a clan of dead lasts no doubt. He froze as a large amount of killer intent erupted, and Naruto clenched his fists as he said, my family has deeper ties to this village than you know. Naruto then continued, after all, the wife of our Shodaime, Hashirama Senju, was Mito Uzumaki. She was the first Jinchuuriki of the Kyuubi. This caused many in the stands to gasp, but Naruto continued, but she wasn't the last. Near the end of her life, a girl from my clan was chosen to harbor the Kyuubi. It was only because of our special chakra that allowed her to do so. Her name was Kushina Uzumaki. My mother was the second Jinchuuriki. Now the civilians were starting to be afraid, while the Jonin felt a pang of sadness, as Kushina was very much loved by the ninja of the village. Enko choked by tears, as did Kurenai, and while hidden, a Neko-masked Anbu nearly cried. Naruto glared out at the civilians and said, but that's not all. On the day of my birth, a man in a mask attacked my father and mother while they were hidden away. And during the attack, he took the Kyuubi from my mother, and set it on the village. Everyone was on edge, civilian and ninja alike, as the ninja were starting to piece things together. Shikamaru in particular said, oh shit. Neji felt frozen on his feet as Naruto said, my father fought the masked man, as well as Kyuubi, and with his last moments on this earth, summoned the Shinigami to seal the beast within me. My father is your beloved Yondaime. A pin drop could be heard, and, as if to hit the final nail, Naruto said, "You fools, you praise my father's name, and yet damn my own. Hypocrites. But that's not the worst of it." He pointed toward the cage box, directly at Sarutobi, as he said, "He was the one to hide it. He hid my family from me, he hid what my father did from me." Neji merely scoffed, "If it happened, then fate deemed it so." Naruto shook his head clear, and said, "You little prick, I have had enough of you. Your hour of judgment has arrived." Naruto vanished, and Neji felt his chest nearly imploded from the force of Naruto's punch, and it sent him skyward. Neji merely looked down at the ground. He thought, "Am I truly going to die here?" He then heard the shout of Bansho Tenin. Heavenly attraction of all creation. Neji felt a pull on his body, and his face met with Naruto's fist, causing him to crash into the ground. His mind far from conscious. Naruto smirked as he picked up his cloak and slipped it back on, the arms from the Asura path having already disappeared. Naruto merely thought to himself, "Why do I always seem to get angry easier when I use the Asura path?" Shaking his head clear, he heard Genma call him as the winner of the match, while many in the stands were speechless. A pair of eyes slowly sank into the ground as the figure thought, "Leader Sama will want to know of his progress." He heard Jackie laugh as he said, "Goddamn kid, that was a good one. The whole, eyes of God, thing was a great touch." Naruto smirked as he thought, it wasn't just a touch, the story of the Rinnegan basically has it as the eyes of God. "I just used it." Jackie nodded as he said, "Nicely done kid. I couldn't have done it better myself." Sakura and the other rookies merely stared in awe, until Kiba shouted, "What the fuck was that?" Kin giggled and said, "That was the Rinnegan. Naruto Koi's Kekkei Genkei. Because he can't use the darkness in places like this, he used the Rinnegan." Shikamaru nodded, understanding. Ino merely had a large blush on her face at the thought of the extra arms. Sakura merely scoffed and said, "The freak got lucky." She froze in fear as everyone near her was shooting her a death glare. Kin was shooting her the worst, as she said, "I knew I should have killed you in that forest." Guy and Lee arrived in time to see the end of the match, and Lee asked, who was the youthful one to defeat Neji. Kin smirked and said, "That would be Naruto Koi." Lee and Guy merely gawked at Naruto's new appearance. Hiyashi sighed and said, "I hope it changed Neji for the better. And perhaps, now I can give him what I should have long ago." Hanabi had a look of fear mixed with admiration, and it made Hiyashi worry. Enko could only laugh at Kurenai's red face, and she said, "Man Kur-chan, you must be thinking of Naruto-kun's extra arms huh?" Kurenai's blush grew worse, and Karen said, "Oh, and how do we know you're not doing the same thing Enko-sensei? And besides, when did it become Naruto-kun, huh?" Enko had the decency to blush, knowing Karen was using the same words she herself used a month ago. Kurenai merely chuckled at her friend's distress, and said, "Never took you as the kind to like younger men." Enko merely pouted and said, "No fair Kur-chan. You too." Karen merely giggled as she left for the fighter's box. Naruto heard the crowd starting to cheer as he walked up the stairs. To his surprise, he saw Gaara standing on one of the landings. He was speaking with a pair of rain ninja, who were, as far as Naruto could tell, were telling Gaara that he had to lose. Naruto saw the sand come out of Gaara's gourd and crush the rain nin. Despite them trying to run away, Naruto could hear the darkness say, "That girl knows how to be ruthless." Naruto shook his head and thought, "You must have gone senile, Gaara-san is a boy." He heard it chuckle, and Jackie told him, "It may be a pain in the ass, but I think he's right on this one." Naruto shook his head, and saw Gaara looking right at him. Naruto kept an impassive face as he said, "Is there something I can help you with?" Gaara stood as still as a statue, and, he said, "Mother is terrified of you. She screams at me, even now, to run as far away from you as possible." Naruto merely asked, "Then why don't you?" Gaara took a slow step forward, bits of sand crumbling off. "Something compels me to do otherwise. I'm not sure what it is." Naruto let a tint of red cross his face as more sand crumbled off Gaara's form. Short red hair fell away to shoulder length, and the lithe male figure gave way to petite feminine. Naruto's blush grew as Gaara was inches from his face, and she said, "You interest me, my heart races when I see you, I don't know why." Naruto could hear Jackie laugh as he said, Jesus kid, the little crazy likes you. Naruto pushed the words away as he felt Gaara leaning against him. Naruto heard her say, this feeling in my chest, it's so warm, I don't wanna move away. Naruto sighed and said, don't you have a match to get to? Gaara shook her head and said, I don't care about that. Naruto sighed and said, but the natives might get restless before the main event, now won't they? Gaara looked at him in shock, and Naruto said, I've had my friends watching the village while I was gone. I know all about Oto and Suna's invasion. I will give you and your siblings one choice, aid my village, or fall. He then cupped Gaara's cheek, making her blush, I wouldn't want to put down someone like you. He then walked away, saying, and by the way, don't kill the Uchiha. I want to prove how worthless the Sharingan is. Gaara dumbly nodded and she made her way to the arena. Sarutobi saw Gaara arrive in the arena, but saw that Sasuke had yet to arrive. One of the Jonin next to him whispered in his ear, Sir, we have yet to find the whereabouts of Sasuke Uchiha. Is it possible he fell into Orochimaru's hands? Sarutobi shook his head lightly, though a voice from behind them said, I wouldn't think so, ya old monkey. Sarutobi in the cage turned and saw Naruto sitting on the railing, the cloak blowing in the wind. Sarutobi let out a sigh, and said, there have been things I've been meaning to ask you, like where you went, and how you gained the Rinnegan. Naruto gave him a glare, which put even the four hidden sound Nin and Orochimaru on edge, as he said, you lie to me about my family, and then you think I'll tell you anything. Fat chance, let's see how you like being in the dark for once. And as for the Uchiha, he's with Kakashi. No doubt they'll show up late just for drama. The cage turned to Sarutobi and said, perhaps we could postpone the match. A lot of the daimyo have come to see it. Naruto scoffed and said, right. And if you actually postpone it, it'll give the little shitstain a bigger ego. He let an evil smirk cross his face, in fact. Let him compete, but not against Gaara-san. Have him fight me instead. A fight between two Dujutsu users would be far more exciting, right? Not to insult Gaara-san of course. Gaara, who heard the whole thing, blushed lightly. Orochimaru was thinking a mile a minute. They raced even more when he saw that Sarutobi was thinking about it. Interesting, the Rinnegan, and that strange power, no doubt a mere genjutsu, I have yet to see how powerful Naruto truly is. Perhaps this could work, he would be a better measuring stick, and Gaara would be fresh for the invasion. Perhaps he has a point Hokage-sama. A fight between Dujutsu users would be more entertaining. Sarutobi sighed, and spoke to the Jonin next to him, you heard it, informed Genma. The Jonin bowed and whispered the order into Genma's ear, who then said, due to Sasuke Uchiha's absence, he will be disqualified from the exams. He heard a lot of the civilians start to boo, but he continued, however, by the request of Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke will be allowed to fight in an exhibition match at the end of the exam, but under no circumstances will he be promoted. Sakura screeched in outrage, until Kin gave her a harsh hit to the back of the head. Kiba slow. WLY took his hands away from his bleeding ears, and said, damn, thanks for knocking her out, pretty sure she blew my eardrums. He looked down at his hands and said, fuck, she did. He then passed out, causing Shikamaru to sigh and say, what the hell? Well, at least I'm not dealing with any of this. He then noticed Naruto speaking to Gaara as the duo went up the steps. Naruto smiled as he said, alright. I was able to buy you some time. You should let your ninja know that you've been screwed with. She looked at him with a wide-eyed stare as he said, the guy sitting in the booth up there, in the cage robes. Smells of snakes and mud. Last I heard, there's no mud in the desert, making me believe that Orochimaru not only killed your cage, but stole his image. He not. Iced she still had a blank look on her face, and he snapped his fingers in front of her face, making her shake her head clear and blush in embarrassment. She asked, how do you know that? Naruto SM. Irkton walked deeper into the dark hallway, multiple pairs of yellow eyes looking out from his shadow as he said, I told you before, I have eyes everywhere. And my little friends here have no problem tearing through shinobi. Oto and Suna alike. It's why I'm giving you this chance. Gaara nodded, and heard Kankuro shout, I forfeit. Naruto sighed and said, looks like he'll do it, let him know about what's going on. Gaara blushed and said, why are you doing this? Giving my village this chance? Naruto sighed and said, because I know that the daimyo of Wind Country has been sending Konoha missions that we shouldn't be getting. No doubt Orochimaru fed your cage some story of revenge to get back at us for it. Your village was just an instrument for Orochimaru to play. I'd be a hypocrite if I got angry at you. Now get going. If you move now we might be able to turn the tide. Gaara nodded, and Naruto said, and perhaps, after all of this is said and done, I could help you with your Tanuki problem. Naruto walked up to the fighter's box, leaving a blushing girl behind. Said girl quickly pulled herself together and vanished via Shunshin to warn the Suna ninja. Naruto stood behind Karen as she said, that was a great fight Naruto-koi, I have to admit, even though you only got those paths down, you made great work with them. Naruto smirked as he said, I only had time for 3. Even with shadow clones. Karen noticed Temari waiting for her down on the arena floor, so she said, looks like I have to go, I'll make it last as long as possible. Naruto smirked as Karen left the box. And Shino asked, that was quite impressive Naruto-san. Though, I'm certain you would have used that blade of yours if it were a little less bright out, wouldn't you? Naruto grinned and said, exactly Shino, I would have. But making everyone in the leaf remember Uzushiogakure was fun. Shino nodded, and turned to the match down below. Karen was using chains similar to the ones Naruto did, using them as whips to try and catch Temari. Temari was using her fan to do her title of Wind Mistress justice, blasting the chains away. She let a smirk cross her face, which was wiped away when a chain wrapped around her from behind, and she quickly turned to see a second Karen, and she said, Shadow Clone. You distracted me, while your clone hid. Karen adjusted her glasses, and said, of course, though, I'd give up if I were you. I could have those chains grow spikes, they'd tear you apart. Temari noticed the spikes slowly growing on the chains, and she quickly said, I forfeit. Genma nodded and said, winner, Karen Uzumaki. The shinobi cheered, as they remembered Kushina's chakra chains, and were proud to see them. Karen caused them to disperse, and she said, well that was fun. Temari gave her a slight glare, but saw that Karen was already gone. Naruto sighed and said, looks like I'm up again. Shino nodded and said, it would seem so. Though Gaara-san seems a bit odd. Well, odder than usual. Naruto smirked, and said, perhaps. He then shocked them by jumping over the railing, and he slid down the wall, the cloak billowing behind him. He kicked off the wall and landed on the ground, it seemingly rising up to meet him. Gaara appeared in a swirl of sand, her expression a calm one, and Naruto noticed her giving him a subtle thumbs up. And he smirked. Genma looked at them both, and was about to call the match until something happened. A large amount of wind picked up in the center of the arena, and coiled into one spot. 2 figures stood back to back, something many scoffed at considering the fights beforehand. Kakashi stood in his usual garb, while Sasuke wore a black one-piece jumpsuit, designed after his old clothes. His arms covered with multiple belts and medical tape. Kakashi merely turned to Genma and asked, are we late? Genma glared at him and said, yes you are, we're in the semifinals now. His match was done over an hour ago. Kakashi had a shocked look, shown by his visible eye widening, and Sasuke said, I demand to have my match. I am an Uchiha. Genma gave a glare as he said, if you wanted it so badly, you should have been here on time for it. The fact that you are carrying on like this is disgraceful. Not only to us as a village in front of so many VIPs, but to your clan. How would they react to seeing you act like a spoiled brat? Naruto started to laugh, and Kakashi turned to him, and froze as he took in his new appearance. Naruto, is that you? What the hell happened? Naruto smirked, and said, I learned about my clan. Now if you'll excuse, get the fuck out F here, before I send you and your little butt buddy flying. Sasuke snarled and said, fight me. Naruto waved his finger, as if talking to a naughty child, and he said, oh we will, but not just yet. Now then, in the meantime, I have a match, and you are standing in the way. Sasuke tried to charge at Naruto, only for Kakashi to grab his shoulder and shake his head. Sasuke scoffed and the duo vanished via Shunshin. Naruto sighed and said, my apologies Gaara-chan. But ignorance must be broken. So sad. Gaara blushed as she said, yes. Now then, shall we give these people a show? Naruto grinned, and got into an odd stance. Horse stance. Genma saw that they were ready, and said, alright, the match between Gaara Sabaku and Naruto Namikaze shall now begin. Kakashi nearly had a heart attack as he stood in the stands, and he said, what did he just say? Please tell me this is a joke. Anko turned to him with a fierce glare, making him cringe. She then got in his face, her face taking a very evil and snake-like appearance, as she said, you think it's a joke? You bastard. Kurenai grabbed her before she could harm the scarecrow, but Anko still ranted, you piece of shit. First you neglect his training for that cock-sucking homo you call an Uchiha. Then you have the nerve to talk down about his family. Who the fuck do you think you are? Kakashi glared and said, I would know if my sensei had a son. Anko tried harder to get out of Kurenai's grip, prompting other Jonin to try and hold her back. Kakashi felt a tap on his shoulder, and when he turned, he felt a fist hit him square in the face. He looked around, but no one saw who did it. No one noticed a cloud passing by overhead when it happened. Naruto was moving out of the way of Gaara's sand, making Sasuke seethe as he said, it should be me fighting down there. Not that dead last. Hiba scoffed and said, cool it emo, you'll get your shot. Sasuke turned and said, what do you mean by that? Hiba grinned and said, if you were here you would know, Naruto talked the Sandaime into allowing you to fight, only after the whole thing is over, and against him. And after what happened to Neji, I wouldn't like it. Sasuke scoffed and said, please, that dead last can't compare to me. Everyone merely shook their head at him. Naruto smirked and raised his arms, making a slab of earth rise up and act as a wall, the sand slamming against it. Gaara looked around, trying to find him. And she heard, funny thing about these eyes, gives me control over the 5 affinities and sub-affinities. Nature manipulation is as easy as a flick of the wrist. She turned and the sand lunged at him, and he parted the sand as it reached him. Sand as earth and wind mixed together. Gaara started to show fear in her eyes. You can stop my sand. No one has ever been able to stop my sand except my father. She started to shake, and she said, I forfeit. Genma sighed and said, winner, Naruto Namikaze. Gaara vanished in a swirl of sand, and Naruto followed. Gaara stood in a hallway away from the fighter's box, her Biju screaming at her, he's able to kill you. You should have taken him down when you had the chance. She tried to shake her head clear, and she thought, no, I won't, I can't, he's been nice to me, I won't. Having a bit of trouble with your demon, ain't ya poppet? She turned around, trying to find the source of the voice. Down. Air. She looked down, and saw what looked like a monkey. She backed away, and tried to attack it with the sand, only for it to reappear every time. Jakku laughed and said, easy, here poppet. I work for the boss. Did ya warn the others? Gaara nodded, and Jakku said, perfect, I'll let the boys know not to attack any of the Suna guys. Be seeing ya around. He then vanished, leaving her shaking. Genma stood on the field as he called, will Shino Aburame and Karen Uzumaki come down for your match? Shino merely looked over at Karen, and he noticed his Kikaichu beetles shirking away a bit. He then turned and said, I won't be able to fight her, as my beetles are useless. I must forfeit. Genma nodded, and said, alright then on to the final match, Naruto Namikaze and Karen Uzumaki. Please come down to the arena floor. Karen and Naruto smirked, and Karen said, but I'm afraid I can't, if I do I'll get beaten, wouldn't want that. Genma, and most of the crowd had a tick mark, though Karen merely laughed it off. In the stands, Kin sighed and said, why am I not surprised? Genma sighed and then said, winner by forfeit, Naruto Namikaze. This concludes the finals of the Chunin exams. And now ladies and gentlemen, we will move on to an exhibition match. Will Naruto Namikaze and Sasuke Uchiha please come down to the arena floor? Sasuke appeared in a swirl of leaves. While Naruto walked out of entrance way, Sasuke smirked and said, ready to lose, dead last. Naruto smirked and said, that's something I should say to you. If you had been on time, you would have seen me take down Neji. But a fool like you certainly wouldn't understand. Sasuke scoffed and said, as if loser, I'll make you kneel as you should be. Naruto sighed and said, Sasuke. Play those games with Kakashi, because unlike you, I have ladies waiting for me to finish. Many of the women in the stands blushed at the innuendo, and Anko had a SMA. LL nosebleed from the images in her head. Genma snapped himself out of it as he said, alright, let the exhibition match begin. He jumped back as Sasuke charged forward, kunai in hand. Naruto smirked and whipped out a chain, wrapping it around Sasuke's arms and pulling it in the direction of his charge, making him trip and fall. Naruto let a smirk cross his face as Sasuke tried to get up. Only for him to smirk and channel lightning into the chain, thinking it would shock Naruto. Naruto smirked as he let go of the chain, making it disperse as it was made of chakra. Sasuke felt his blood boil as he activated his Sharingan, and charged forward, going faster than before. Guy looked shocked as he turned to Kakashi and said, you didn't. Sakura asked, what do you mean? What did Kakashi-sensei do? Guy shook his head and said, Kakashi copied Lee's taijutsu and taught it to Sasuke. Guy sent Kakashi a rare glare, thought the scarecrow merely brushed it off, and said, Sasuke needed the speed boost to face Gaara. Lee didn't have the ninjutsu needed to win, Sasuke does. The other Jonin gave Kakashi a fierce glare, causing the scarecrow to shirk away. Naruto saw Sasuke charge, and said two words that caused tension in the stands, Asura Path. Sasuke smirked as he appeared in front of Naruto in a flash of speed, only for Naruto to punch him in the stomach and grab him with two mechanical arms that sprouted out from under his cloak. Sasuke struggled to break free, only to feel pain in his chest as another pair of arms sprouted, punching him square in the chest. Naruto dropped Sasuke as he coughed on the ground. Feel ready to give up Uchiha? I can go all day, you can't. Sasuke glared at him and said, screw you, you clanless freak. Unlike you, I come from a noble clan in this village. The Uchiha are the elite. Naruto snarled as he grabbed Sasuke by the neck, and he shouted, noble. Noble. Who the fuck do you think you are? How dare you? You dare call me a clanless freak? Yet I have a dojutsu just like you, but unlike yours, mine has real power. Diva Path. The extra arms fell away, and he pointed his palm right at Sasuke's face, and said, Shinra, Tensai. Sasuke was blasted back, right into the stadium walls, and into blissful unconsciousness. Naruto scoffed and said, pathetic. So much for the elite. Genma sighed, and said, winner, Naruto Namikaze. Stunned silence filled the arena, as many thought that the Uchiha elite would beat the dead last. Many were reassessing themselves. The silence did not last, as explosions rang out through the village. Naruto smirked and thought, the invasion has begun. Time to make you suffer before you die, Orochimaru. Naruto heard the explosions around the village, and a swirl of sand appeared next to him. He smirked and said, Gaara-chan, I take it the Suna shinobi are on our side, yes. Gaara nodded, and she said, but of course they are, though it seems Hyoto Nin had their ninja perform summoning. There are giant snakes at the gates, meant to break down the defenses. Naruto smiled and said, are they Biju size? Gaara nodded and said, nearly. Shukaku is still larger though. Gaara merely looked at the still smiling face of Naruto's, and said, I see, I'll get to it then. She then vanished in a swirl of sand, and Naruto dodged a blade of wind that nearly cut his arm off. He turned and saw Baki, who had a murderous look on his face. You brat, how dare you turn Suna's weapon against us? Naruto snarled as he said, so, that's all you see her as? You foolish bigot, you're just another fool who can't see us for who we are, but only for what we hold. And lest you forget, your village has been played for fools. Baki snarled as he said, like that matters to me. I actually knew the Kazekage was dead. I went along with Orochimaru's plan. I want you tree huggers to fall. Naruto glared, and clouds started to roll in, casting shadows all over the village. A shadow overtook the stadium, and darklings started to attack the Oto ninja, scaring the Konoha ninja at first, but once they saw the little imps attack their enemies, they got over the fear. Naruto had the creeper heads out, along with the demon arms, as he said, so, that's how it is, huh? Whatever regret I had about killing you is gone now. Baki smirked and prepared another wind blade, only for a sword to pierce his chest. Baki merely had his eyes wide as his now dead body was kicked off the blade. Naruto saw it was the Neko masked Anbu, and he heard her mutter. "That was for Hayate, you bastard." Naruto merely stood dumbfounded until he heard her say, "You need to go, don't forget, there's an invasion going on." Naruto nodded, and said, "You're right, I'll get going." As he turned, he heard her say, "Wait, maybe, sometime, I could talk to you about your mother, she was my sensei." Naruto smiled and said, "Thank you, I'd like that." He then called on the Asura path, the extra arms making the cloak flutter out, and he started to run toward the wall, before punching the ground, launching himself into the air, and landing on the roof where Orochimaru was. Right before the barrier was placed around them, Orochimaru, seeing Naruto, chuckled darkly and said, well, how unexpected, Naruto-kun, come to help me get revenge on this decrepit old man." Naruto glared while Sarutobi started to sweat, only for Naruto to say, "Sorry, but that's not why I'm here. I'm not here for the old man." This made Sarutobi sigh in relief, "But I'm not here to save his sorry ass either, the one I came for, was you, Orochimaru." Naruto drew Kusanagi, holding it in a kendo stance, while 4 blades came of the extra arms, 4 wakizashi-length blades minus the guards. They were pitch black, and Naruto said, "You know, I should thank you." Looking at both Sarutobi's and Orochimaru's shocked faces, along with those of the Anbu and the Sound 4, Naruto said, "If you didn't decide to try and seal Kyuubi's chakra away, my real power would have never risen to the surface, so in thanks, he vanished," and Orochimaru knurled. Why lost his head in dodging the 5 blades, as Naruto continued, "Just go ahead and die." Orochimaru barely had any time to draw his own blade, as each arm worked in sync to keep him on his feet, that surprised the hell out all who were watching. Karen was back to back with Anko, the duo surrounded by Oto Ninja. Anko let a look of disgust cross her face as the Oto Nin leered, and she heard one say, "Look here boys. It's Orochimaru-sama's old slut." Karen felt Anko's hair bristle, and she said, "You shouldn't pay these bastards any mind, after all." She held out one hand, and made a grabbing motion. And multiple chains wrapped around her hand, and the necks of the Oto Nin. Who gives a shit about what a dead man has to say? She then pulled on the chain, the spikes ripping the Oto Nin's heads off. Sakura, seeing the sight, puked and said, "You freak. I knew it." Karen merely glared at her, and walked away. Sakura heard something that shook her to the core, "That's T. He, last time I let you get away with that, next time, I'll rip your head off your shoulders." Sakura fell onto her butt, a Oto Nin about to kill her, only for Kakashi to pierce the Nin's skull with a kunai as he said, "Sakura, stay close. I'll keep you safe." Sakura paid him no mind, as her eyes stayed toward Karen, her thoughts frozen. Tamari saw her little bro sister heading toward the gates, an arm covered in sand as she used it to rip Oto Nin apart, and Tamari saw what she was heading for. The giant 3-headed snake that was at the village gates. Tamari shouted out to her sister, only for Gaara to ignore her. Sand swirling around her and creating a large form. The snakes felt themselves cringe as the sand took on the appearance of the Ikibi no Shukaku, the size of the figure overshadowing them. And Gaara appeared on its forehead, her body showing from the waist up. She had a dark grin on her face as she said, "You fools will die." Sand poured out from the what could be the Shukaku's feet, swirling and grabbing all Oto Nin near the gates, drawing them in. Her grin only grew as she slammed her hands onto the head of the sand construct, and shouted, "Internal sand burial." The belly of Shukaku seemed to implode for a moment, a loud crunching sound coming from within, and the crushed and bloody bodies of the Oto Nin were expelled out. Gaara then turned her attention to the giant snake, the grin never leaving her face. Tamari merely watched in morbid fascination as she thought, "What did Naruto say to you?" Gaara controlled the sand arms to grab onto the snake's 3 heads. The heads held within the palms of the sand claws. She then clenched the claws around their heads, entrapping them, with a pulse, crushed all 3 heads, making the summon go back to its realm. Tamari merely was amazed as the sand structure dissolved, leaving Gaara standing in the street, the sand forming in her gourd again. Tamari then screamed as Sasuke dropped down, Chidori in hand. As he screamed, "Die Suna bitch!" Gaara turned to see him racing toward her, only for a red and white blur to clothesline him, knocking him unconscious. Well, seems the Gaki's little girlfriend has some enemies. I'm not sure what's going on, but I was about to kill that snake with one of my toads, and you beat me to the punch. Nice work by the way. Gaara saw the figure stand straight. Long white hair in a spiky braid, dressed as if he stepped out of a kabuki play. In place of the normal Konoha headband, his was spiked on the side, like that of a horned toad, with the kanji for oil replacing the leaf. This was Jiraiya, the Gama Sennin toad sage and member of the Sannin. Jiraiya smirked as he said, "Well, you must be the Ikibi Jinchuuriki, that Gaki knows how to pick 'em." Gaara glared and said, "Who the hell are you?" Jiraiya smirked, a toad appearing underneath him as he did a ridiculous pose, standing on the toad's head as he did a dance that would embarrass a lesser man, saying, "I am the man who makes ladies swoon, the ninja sage that men wish to emulate. I am the great Gama Sennin of MT. Myoboku. My name is Jiraiya." Gaara merely stared as she said, "And I'm far from impressed. You look more like a clown than a sage." Jiraiya face faulted, muttering, "Disrespectful brats." He then felt something jump on him as he heard, "Seems you are of this place, Poppet. Good thing too, the boss is dealing with a rather nasty snake, while me and the boys, aloud, ahem," was heard as he said, "Sorry, the boys and gals are dealing with the invaders. Seems everything's peachy on this end." Gaara looked around and saw darklings tearing apart the rest of the Odo nin that she didn't get. Tamari nervously approached and said, "Gaara, Gaara started to walk back toward the stadium and said, "We should hurry, Naruto-kun might need us there." Jiraiya snickered and said to himself, "Naruto-kun huh? This Aki might be an even bigger gold mine than his old man." Inside the barrier, Naruto growled as he held back the Shodime, Hashirama, and he let his head turn to glare at Sarutobi as he dealt with Tobirama, who, in his foolishness, tried to butt in on Naruto's fight, giving Orochimaru the time needed to bring out the two former Hokages. Naruto jumped back as a tree branch sprouted from the ground, courtesy of Hashirama. Naruto, using the water in the wood, turned the branch back on its master, making him slam into the barrier. Sadly, despite the fact that Hashirama's body burned when he touched the barrier, it regenerated as soon as it happened. Naruto saw Orochimaru stand near the barrier, an arrogant smirk on his face. Naruto ducked under a kick and used his metal arms to bash the Shodime's face in, allowing him to see the seal tag that kept him here. Naruto smirked as he grabbed the seal before the head could regenerate, and burned it using a slight bit of fire manipulation. Orochimaru was shocked to see the Shodime start to crumble, a peaceful look on the former's face, and Naruto had his hands in a prayer, and said, "Find peace, great uncle, your brother will join you soon. Say hello to Mito-sama for me." Hashirama smiled as his body vanished, leaving the corpse of a sound nin behind. Sarutobi was cursing at himself. It was his stubbornness that let his fallen student bring back the Hokages in the first place, and even though he wasn't dealing with his first sensei, Tobirama was no slouch. The use of Sweden water release that made him famous was easy to see, as he drew water from the branches his brother made, as well as the air, as limited as it was inside the barrier. Sarutobi swung his staff to block an incoming punch, only for a metallic hand to grab Tobirama's head, and it quickly set ablaze, burning the Nadime's head and the seal tag along with it, making the rest of the body go with it. Sarutobi held a look of fear, as the shadows casted by the tree branch hid Naruto, all except the 6 pairs of glowing yellow eyes, and 4 burning fists. Orochimaru paled, but took the opportunity to draw his kusanagi out of a snake that slid out of his mouth, and charged at Sarutobi with the intent to kill. The poisonous blade was stopped by a dulled blade, and Orochimaru felt himself get wrapped up by a demon arm around his neck. Naruto chuckled and said, "Oh, the sweet irony, you had me by my neck, now I have you by yours." Orochimaru snarled and tried to will the kusanagi to extend, only for one of Naruto's metallic arms to grab it by the blade, and yanking it, and the snake that held it, out of Orochimaru's mouth. Orochimaru then felt blood fly as a large slash appeared across his chest, and he shouted, "You brat. You can't kill me. I'm a god amongst men. I'm immortal. Naruto waved a finger, as if scolding a child, and said, and that is something I'm calling bullshit out. Immortal? Really? Last I checked, another slash appeared on Orochimaru's left arm, severing it. You are still human, just like me, and just like Sarutobi. Immortal, invincible, such concepts are unreachable, no matter how much you reach for it. After all, time is the one thing no one can escape. Trees and grass wither, oceans dry up, mountains crumble. And why? Time. It eventually takes us all. You just try to cheat it. But it can't be cheated. Only paused, until time marches forward again. He then severed Orochimaru's other arm, and drew out Aotn, holding it to his head, a look of fear etched over the fallen Sannin's face. Naruto chuckled and said, there is a saying. When someone is about to kill you, you should do one of two things. Either try to entertain the person holding a gun to your head, or try to convince them to spare you. So I ask you, who's the predator now? As he primed the weapon, a masked Anbu jumped in the way, the barrier already dropped as the Sound Four rushed to the aid of their master. The only female of the group, Kyuubi, felt chains wrap around her limbs, and saw them lead back to the one person she never thought she'd see again, Kin. Is that you? Kin smirked, and said, why yes it is. But talk will have to be for later. The chains came out of her sleeves, the chains being metal rather than chakra, as she lacked the ability to make them. The rest of the Sound Four grabbed Orochimaru and ran, a few of the real Anbu going after them, but were stopped as one of the members, who had extra arms akin to a spider, spat webbing at them, making them fall. Naruto glared as they retreated, and he slowly turned toward Sarutobi, grabbing him by his neck, to the shock of the Anbu, and a certain white-haired pervert as he landed on the roof. Jiraiya shouted, Naruto, let him go. Naruto merely sneered as he said, why should I? All my life I was stuck being held under his thumb. All the lies, everything he put me though, it ends now. Jiraiya secretly tried to prepare a seal, only to feel something jump on his back. He tried to turn to see, only for a voice to say, now, boss needs to get something off his chest. So let him speak. Naruto grinned and said, oh yes I do. Now then, where to begin? Oh yes, it was you who left Uzushio to die, you who just so happened to tell everyone of me being Kyuubi's prison, but forgot all about who stuck him in there. Now then, one simple question, why? Sarutobi tried to hold a defiant face, only for a steel fist to strike him in the face, making all present to cringe. Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, there are other ways of getting the info out of your head. I never got to practice it much, but you would never enjoy it. He closed his eyes and thought, human path, the metal arms fell away. But darklings kept Sarutobi pinned down. Naruto merely held a hand over Satobi's head, and said, one last chance, tell me why you saw fit to ruin my life, or else. Sarutobi merely looked away, and by now the Jonin sensei had arrived at the cage box, Kakashi shouting, let him go Genin. That's an order. Naruto smirked and grabbed the aged cage by the hair, making the other Jonin and a certain Sannin tense. Naruto searched through Sarutobi's memories, and saw it. He saw the night he was born, and saw how broken Sarutobi was after he heard of his wife's death, and it explained it all. He blamed Naruto for Bawako's death. For that reason, he used what he could to make him suffer. Naruto snarled and pulled his hand away, the lack of training the human paths. Other ability the only reason Sarutobi kept his soul. You bastard. You incompetent, foolish, bastard. Naruto gave the aged cage a punch to the chest, a powerful one. He then grabbed him by the head again, and stared him right in the eye as he said, you old fool, I know all your little secrets, and let me ask you something. A lot had been taken from me, my childhood, my chance at a proper family. My parents. Do you even know what it means to be a Jinchuuriki? It means a life of sacrifice. We are sacrificed to hold our demons at bay, we sacrifice any chance of being a normal person. Now I ask you, with all that I was sacrificed for, what have you sacrificed? The Jonin were glaring at their aged leader, the women of the crowd slightly crying. Naruto started again, I'll answer for you Sarutobi, and the answer is nothing. You never made a single sacrifice, acting like you know it all, Well, guess who's the boss now? It's me. Sarutobi glared as he said, "You demon. How dare you say that to me?" He was quickly silenced as a darkling covered his mouth, and Naruto continued, "How dare I? You have a lot of nerve yourself, old man. And to think, I once respected you. That is until you thought you could play God with my life." Sarutobi shook the claw off his mouth as he shouted, "Demons like you need to be controlled. Otherwise you'd have turned on this village. And what's worse, was that an Uzumaki showed up." Naruto glared at the old cage, making some of the Jonin more nervous than before. "You have a problem with my clan, old man. Or, were you just afraid of me being turned against you? Well, your precious villagers certainly helped with that long before Karen got here." This made a certain red-haired Uzumaki angry, and as she glared at the old cage, Anko placed a hand on her shoulder, a tear going down her cheek. "No doubt he told you about what used to happen to him." Karen looked at her from the corner of her eye. Yet confusion was still written across her face. "Used to." Anko nodded and said, "Ever since he became a shinobi, the civilians merely tried to ignore him, or glare, since they could no longer actively try to attack him. Before, if they did so, the civilian council would wipe away any charges against the attackers, but they can't now, though, they always seem to do it so easily. Now I see why." Naruto's glare intensified, and he said, "How does it feel to have everything brought to light?" "You damn fool." The sun peeked through the clouds, making the darklings vanish, and Sarutobi backed away as fast as he could. Jiraiya stood in between Naruto and Sarutobi and said, "As much as I would love to see him get what he deserves, he must be punished in a fair trial. Anbu, take my sensei away." The Anbu bowed and did as asked. Sarutobi, too weak from the battle and his age, could not fight back as they slapped chakra-sealing cuffs onto his wrists. As he was dragged away, profanities spouted from his mouth that made even Kyuubi blush. Jiraiya sighed, but was cut off as Naruto grabbed him by the shirt and said, "Now where have you been, Godfather?" Jiraiya cringed and said, "Sarutobi insisted that I deal with my spy network. He kept telling me that you were training excellently." Naruto scoffed and said, "And you decided to trust him, right?" Jiraiya nodded and said, "He's my sensei, or rather, he was. And a student is supposed to trust his sensei." Naruto felt memories of the Mizuki incident rise to the surface, and he dropped Jiraiya on his ass, and simply turned away. Naruto merely said, "Ladies, let's go." Karen and Kin nodded, and the trio, along with Anko and Kyuubi, left the area via Shunshin. Later that night, Namikaze compound. Naruto laid on the couch, being both emotionally and physically drained from the day's events. Karen laid next to him and kissed his cheek, making a small smile stretch on his face. "How is that girl setting in? I think her name was Kyuubi." Karen smiled and said, "She's talking to Kin-chan in her room, no doubt they're catching up." Naruto shared a smile, and he felt a pull in the back of his mind. He then said, "I'm gonna take a nap. This day has been one big crazy fest." Karen had a knowing smirk on her face as she said, "Let me guess, Big Bad and Furry is calling, isn't he?" Naruto chuckled and said, "He doesn't like being called furry. But yeah, he is. Better go see what he wants." Karen left the room with a smile as Naruto laid down, feeling himself being pulled into his mind. Naruto's mindscape. He found himself in the foyer of a rather lavish mansion, with a design Jackie told him was of his old mansion back when he was Don of the Mafia. He saw that the walls were a pristine white marble, and Naruto smelled incense burning upstairs. A sad smile crossed his lips as he remembered what Jackie told him of Jenny, his ex-girlfriend. Of how she was killed by Jackie's old boss, Polly Franchetti. As he walked up the stairs, he remembered the story Jackie told him during the month, the story of how he became the Kyuubi. Flashback. Naruto sat across from Jackie in his room in the mansion. The duo sitting in what Jackie described as a French conversation chair. Jackie then spoke up and said, "I think it's time I tell you a little story." Naruto looked at him and asked, "What story is it? It's not the one with that hooker candy again, is it?" Jackie chuckled, downed his glass of scotch, and said, No, not that. It's the story of how I became the Kyuubi. I did say I would tell ya." Naruto quickly sat up in his seat as Jackie began, "You already know about my escapades as the Darkness host. But, when I finally died after all was said and done, I was sent to hell. No surprise, considering the life I lived, noble intentions partway through or not. Anyways, when I died, the darkness vanished, no doubt looking for a new host. I hear the screams of the damned for a long time. It was almost deafening. I couldn't tell how long I had been there. Before it, the Kyuubi made its way past me in hell. Big son of a bitch, he looked at me like I was a happy meal. And he went and ate me. Fucking ate me. Not sure when, but the bastard actually made it to the human world, and while inside it, I could see what it saw, being a Spiri. He didn't mean I could stay in his stomach in the real world. He ate some poor saps who actually got out by eating some of his stomach. Was disgusting. But, I digress. Eventually the fox bastard fell asleep, and I took my chance. As a spirit, I knew there were things I could do, and with the last bit of my strength, I took over his body, wiping out its mind and making its body my own. He never stood a chance. Naruto cringed a little and said, "So let me get this straight, the old Kyuubi ate you while on a trip into hell, and when it fell asleep, you took over its body, letting you live again. Is that about right?" Jackie nodded and said, "Beat being in hell, that's for sure." Naruto merely sighed and said, "So, what happened after that?" "Because I know the Kyuubi was a summon used by Madara Uchiha." Jackie shivered and said, "That is not something I like thinking about. During the time I took over the fox's body, I was wild, to say the least. I had the mindset of a feral beast, which Madara took advantage of. It was how he controlled me, at least until that wood guy had me sealed in his wife. I will tell you, there is stuff about him in those history books you do not want to know." Naruto shivered and asked, "Bedroom?" "Bedroom." The duo then proceeded to rush over to the drinks and down bottles, trying to block out the image. After a couple bottles of scotch were consumed, each, Jackie continued, "Eventually, I was transferred into your mother, very nice person by the way, was stubborn as all hell, very, very much like you. And well, she met your old man, and well, you know the rest." Flashback end. Naruto got to Jackie's room, and saw two pictures in what looked like a shrine, one of Jenny, and the other of Jackie's Aunt Sarah. He saw Jackie praying in front of the shrine, his eyes closed and his hands in prayer. He heard him mutter, "Amen," before Jackie stood up and said, "Well, you took your sweet time getting here." Naruto smirked and said, "Well, hey, you certainly spruced up the place. I figured take a look around, enjoy the view." Jackie chuckled as he walked over to where he had his drinks and said, "Little smartass. How about a drink?" Naruto nodded and accepted the glass of scotch as Jackie said, "Hell of a performance today, you gave a hell of a show. It's a pity that Snake wouldn't just die." Naruto shrugged as he sipped the scotch and said, "Well, he won't be bothering us for a while, that's for sure, seeing as his personal boy toy got blown away. He'd need a very good doctor to fix him now." Jackie smirked and said, "Damn right." Naruto chuckled and said, "So, you just invite me down here for drinks and laughing at a bastard's expense." Jackie shook his head and said, "I wish it were just that, but no, it's not. Kid, I'm gonna be blunt, while you are doing great with the power of the darkness, you have barely scratched the surface of what it can do. I know you want to train your bloodline during the month you were out of the village, but now, we'll need to give you a crash course on how it truly is." Jackie then stood up and led Naruto to the basement of the mansion. A dimly lit room that was designed similar to an arena. Jackie then said, "Here, I'll be teaching you more on the darkness, and the various powers you have because of it." A suit of armor enclosed around Jackie, giving him the image of a warrior from hell, which was oddly fitting. Naruto merely gaped as Jackie said, "We'll do this during the night as you sleep, so during the day, you can practice your other powers. I was once considered the most powerful host the darkness had. And soon, you'll be taking that title away from me." 2 weeks later, Namikaze compound. The GHT rays of the sun crept their way into the window, soon reaching Naruto's eyes. As he opened them, he felt a bit of weight on him. He looked down to see spots of red and black in his still blurry vision. He lightly shook his head to clear his vision, and saw Karen and Kin still asleep with peaceful expressions on their faces. He also noticed the slight blush on their face, making him think, "I know those two are having naughty dreams about me, Finding it easy to merely make a seal-less clone, he switched places with it to get out of bed. Seeing the clone grin, he shook his head as he went to the bathroom. He opened the door, and to his surprise, see Kyuubi already stepping out of the shower, her body still nude and her wet hair draping over her front like a pair of drapes, helping to hide her modesty. She merely stood there shocked, a blush on her face matching her hair. Before, in Naruto's mind, she could scream, "Pervert!" Naruto covered his eyes and was out in the hallway, Jackie laughing up a storm. Yeah, laugh it up in there. Jackie chuckled as he said, "Take it easy, kid. Be lucky she didn't throw something heavy at ya. I should know, Jenny and I." He stopped, and Naruto knew why. "Jackie, you still feeling okay?" Despite the fact that Jackie was the Kyuubi no Kitsune, he was still human in a way. Jackie smiled a little and said, "I'm alright, besides kid. Don't you have a sexy redhead to deal with? I swear you're just like your old man." Naruto blushed, but he knew the dawn-turned demon was right. In fact, he heard someone clearing their voice, and looked up. And nearly wished he hadn't. Kyuubi, now in a bathrobe, still had her hair wet, but wrapped up in a towel, what would fit anyway. She merely grabbed Naruto by the hand, and took him to her room. Tossing him to her bed, she closed the door and said, "I really should say something to Kin about that, but you looked like I was about to hit you. Normally that's normal for me. But you looked scared out of your mind. That's not what I saw in the invasion, not the one who fought and nearly killed Orochimaru, that's not the guy Kin told me about." So what gives? She saw that Naruto wasn't looking at her, and then noticed that her robe was a little short. It was dangerously close to exposing too much below the waist, and she mentally cursed Karen for even giving it to her. She then grabbed both of Naruto's cheeks and turned his face so he was looking into her eyes, and she simply said, "Talk, now." Naruto gulped, and started to tell her about his old crush with Sakura. And she'd pound his skull in with even the slightest action. If he acted nice, punch to the head. If he said anything even remotely flattering, punch to the head. As even worse if she thought he was being perverted in any way. Not to mention he saw many women in the village detested any guy carrying a certain orange book. This made him hate perverts, and the creation of the Oroku no Jutsu, sexy jutsu, a way to punish perverts and even expose those who try to hide that they were. Neither knew that Karen and Kin were listening in at the door, both nearly seething in rage. Kin for his treatment overall by the pink-haired banshee, and Karen for a very specific reason. That bitch. He's lucky all those hits didn't give him brain damage. Maki healing and Kyuubi certainly helped, but those seals on him just made it worse. She better not come near me, or I'll tear her sorry ass to pieces. Kin then blushed as they both heard something from behind the door. Kyuubi was sharing their thoughts, "That stupid bitch. The way he says it, she sounds like a Tsunade, but my god, she's the worst kind. If I see her I'll let my doki smash her skull. Let's see how she likes it." But she then said, "So that's why you were scared, huh? You thought I'd hate you because of that?" Naruto slowly nodded his head, and to his surprise, she gently pushed him onto her bed, her on top of him. Naruto kept a large blush on his face the entire time, and he couldn't help but stare into her eyes. He didn't know what brought this out of the normally vulgar and outspoken young woman. The last 2 weeks he noticed her giving him looks. Ones that reminded him of someone, but he wasn't concentrating. He blushed even harder when he noticed how close the two of them were. It caused a reaction downstairs, and he quickly grew afraid. Kyuubi noticed and said, "Oh, feeling a little stiff for little old me, huh?" Naruto barely breathed a word, but was surprised when she blushed and said, "You're pressing against me." Naruto looked down and saw that their hips were touching, cloth barely acting as a barrier. He heard her whisper, Do you find me attractive?" Her blush made her hair seem pale in comparison, and not trusting his words, he nodded. Kyuubi whispered, "I know how Kin-chan and Karen feel about you, and how you feel about them. I don't want to ruin it, or even get in the way." Naruto then heard her whisper, "No, I'm just a foul-mouthed tomboy. No one even looks at me like a woman." Naruto saw her eyes nearly tearing up. He then did the most impulsive thing he could think of. He kissed her. Chiyuya's eyes grew wide and Naruto thought she was about to slap him, so he gently pulled away. He then heard her whisper something. But he couldn't hear her. He softly asked, "What did you say?" Karen looked at Kin and asked, "Did you know if she had a thing for him?" Kin merely shook her head. Chiyuya and her may be close friends. But even she didn't know everything about her. They turned back and saw Chiyuya slightly parting her robe, and Karen nearly threw the door open, only for a clawed hand to grab her wrist. The two of them looked down and saw it was Jacko, who shook his head and said, "Let the boss and the lass have their alone time. They both need it, more than you can even imagine." Kin and Karen looked at the darkling, giving him a glare that would melt him if possible. Karen and Kin were sitting in the living room, but still heard it all, and they barely stopped themselves from rubbing their legs together just from hearing it. They both shared the same thought, "Lucky bitch." There was a knock on the door, and Karen, making sure she wasn't looking like she had bedhead, went to the door and opened it. To her surprise, Jiraiya was the one who knocked, and he asked, "Ah, you must be Karen, right? Is Naruto awake yet? He and I have a mission." Karen nodded but blushed, which Jiraiya caught. He had a lecherous grin as he said, "Oh ho. I'm guessing you two already have." He was cut off as Karen punched him in the gut, making the Sannin fall over. Oh, Nay of the Darklings hid in the shadows while this happened and went to notify Naruto that he had a guest. Naruto, hearing the message, looked to Chiyuya and kissed her softly, making her smile. "Seems we have to get up, huh?" Naruto nodded and the duo got dressed. Naruto still foregoing a shirt in the possibility of needing his Asura path. Chiyuya, rather than her old Oto uniform, wore a black kimono much like Karen and Kin, but with her flute at her belt. And to replace her old hat, she now wore a smaller hat that resembled a bird's head. After taking a look at Uzumaki seals, Naruto was able to have the instrument double as a chakra saber. This paired with a wakizashi gave Chiyuya the ability to use her genjutsu as well as a dual-wielding kenjutsu stance, something she was still trying to create. As the duo reached the living room, Jiraiya let a perverted look cross his face before he quickly turned serious. Naruto gave his godfather a cold glare, making the Sannin shrink back a little. Naruto merely growled out, "Why are you here, Jiraiya? Has your sensei sent you here to arrest me?" Jiraiya cringed as he knew that was coming. Taking a deep breath, he said, "No, Naruto, I'm not here to arrest you. Despite the council really wanting me to. They want me to slap inhibitor seals on you so they can take Kyuubi from you. Or at the very least, seal that power of yours away." Naruto merely cringed as the darkness made itself known, shouting, "No seal will hold back my power. I will crush any who try." He had to hold himself up, as it felt like a bunch hammers struck him at once. Jiraiya looked at him worried, but Naruto asked, "So, we have a mission?" Jiraiya nodded and said, "Yeah, we do. Seeing as Sarutobi has been officially ousted as Hokage, thanks to what you did the day of the invasion, and made him confess. But now we have no Hokage, which leads us to our mission. You and I are going to look for the next Hokage." Karen raised an eyebrow as she asked, "And who is that exactly?" Jiraiya couldn't help but smirk as he said proudly, "My last teammate and last of the Senju clan, Tsunade." Naruto scoffed and said, "Fine then. If I have to chase the one woman who doesn't like being found all over High no Kuni, I have a condition." Jiraiya groaned and asked, "And what exactly is this condition?" It was Naruto's turn to smirk as he said, "As backup for this mission, I request the permission to bring Chiyuya, formerly of Oto, Karen Uzumaki, and Kintsuchi, as well as John and Anko Mitarashi." Jiraiya slapped his forehead as he said, "Why did I just know you'd say that? Let me guess. Can't leave home without your girlfriends, but why Anko?" Naruto sent a slight glare as he said, "You know exactly why. My team is a bunch of jackasses with their heads so far up their asses it's disgusting. I already made the offer to Anko for me, Kin, and Karen to be a team with her as the sensei." He saw Chiyuya look a little down, but he wrapped an arm around her as he said, "And I'm sure she wouldn't mind Chiyuya joining us as well." This caused the redhead to snuggle against him, making Jiraiya smile. Jiraiya then chuckled and said, "I'm aware of that kid. She came by the Hokage office to put the papers in for the team formation." With a little rearranging from yours truly, I made it happen. Now then, WOU. LD the newly formed Team Mitarashi formerly escort Jiraiya of the Sannin in his mission to locate and retrieve Tsunade Senju as part of an S-rank mission. He reached into his robes, and pulled out a scroll. It was embroidered with the mark of an S-ran mission. Naruto felt his eye twitch as he asked, "You planned this out ahead of time, didn't you, you old pervert?" Jiraiya merely smirked. Konoha Dango Bar. Anko was busying herself enjoying her favorite food to pass the time for her team's first mission. The mere thought of her team made her feel happy, even if a few of the patrons looked at her with disdain. She even heard what some of the women were saying about her. "She still dresses like that, I bet she's a hooker on the side. I heard she's got a thing for the demon boy. I heard she stormed into the Hokage's office demanding a team. Who does she think she is?" Anko nearly gave into an impulse to pierce the bitch's brains with a dango stick, but she blew. Shed as she remembered that she did barge into the Hokage's office. She was surprised to hear her request for a team be granted, but she wasn't going to complain. After checking the time, she paid the bill for her food and walked out. But not before scaring the ladies in the store by having a dango stick accidentally pass their clothes in a way that revealed their breasts, making them have to cover themselves. Sometimes it paid to be her. Konoha Gate. An hour later. Naruto noticed Anko coming toward Gate, causing him to smile. Karen smiled as well, and hugged him, as did Tayuya and Kin. The five of them had a celebratory hug, though they did no go unnoticed. Many of the villagers started to whisper about them, something that Naruto had a Rinnegan-enhanced glare sent their way, making them scatter. Though they then had a more unpleasant setback. "Naruto Baka, where the hell have you been? You were supposed to meet us for training." Naruto and the others looked in the direction of the voice and groaned. Sakura seethed and said, "Screw you, Baka, how about you go off and play with your little whores, you freak." Kakashi merely kept his nose in his book, and Sasuke kept sending glares Naruto's way. Naruto on the other hand had to use Asura Path to keep the others from killing the Pinkett. "You know you got a big mouth for someone who's supposed to be a ninja. What has this generation coming to? Hell, Tsunade never was this much of a headache." Everyone looked at the source of the voice to see Jiraiya, who had a disgusted look on his face as he said, "Kakashi, can't you keep your team on a leash? Or in her case, a damn muzzle? I don't appreciate someone badmouthing my godson or his girls." Kakashi merely ignored the Sannin, making the man nearly lose his cool. Though the lazy nin took the time to say, "I would if Naruto didn't keep picking fights." "And where are you off to with my student, Lord Jiraiya?" Jiraiya turned to walk away and said, "I'm taking my student on a mission to find Tsunade, so she can come back here and whip this place into shape. I've been taking stock around here while my spies have been looking for her, and to be honest, she's needed here more than ever." This made Kakashi look at him as if he were an idiot. He then said, "But Lord Jiraiya, last I checked, Naruto was my student, surely you know that." Jiraiya nearly snapped and said, "And what exactly have you done, Kakashi?" "Huh, I'll tell you, shit. You have done absolute shit. You let your team degenerate by trying to get them to work together when they clearly can't. You focus on training one student when you had 3. You have been so neglectful it's no surprise that Naruto asked to be taken off the team. As of right now, Naruto Namikaze is no longer part of Team 7. He has been transferred to Team Mitarashi, or Team 13, with me acting as secondary sensei to Anko Mitarashi." Sakura then said, "But you can't do that. There is no such thing as a one-genin team." Jiraiya and Naruto smirked, as Jiraiya said, "Oh, but he's not on it alone. With him are Tayuya, newly instated Leaf Chunin, Kintsuchi, Leaf Chunin, and Karen Uzumaki, Leaf Chunin. And he's not a genin. For his actions during the invasion, myself and the Shinobi Council granted him the title of Special Jonin. Considering he nearly killed a Sannin, I think it's well earned." This left everyone in awe. Anko knew she had her team, but she wasn't told about them getting any promotions. Naruto merely thought, "As slick as the toads you work with, Jiraiya." Kakashi dropped his book on the ground as he said, "There is no way in hell he could be a Chunin, let alone a Special Jonin. This is absolutely a lie." Jiraiya shook his head and said, "It's not a lie, kid, it's true. Most of the daimyos have been talking about Naruto the last 2 weeks. They basically demanded he get something higher than Chunin. Now if you'll excuse us, we real shinobi have a mission to partake in. An S-rank mission. Jiraiya merely turned and walked away, a grin never leaving his face. Naruto and the others merely started laughing, even Jackie. Naruto soon calmed down and said, "So was all that you said back there real? Did I actually get boosted to special Jonin?" Jiraiya nodded and said, "Sure did kid, you have all the daimyo talking, and that doesn't happen often. Unfortunately, without a Hokage to make it official, you have the rank as a temp basis. But once we find Tsunade, she can secure your spot with ease." Naruto nodded and RTED talking to Tayuya and the girls as they walked, blushes plastered on their faces. Jiraiya noticed and he asked Anko, "Is it just me, or do they seem like they've, well, you know?" She glared at the pervert and elbowed him in the crotch, refusing to even answer the man. He merely tried to push through the pain as he said, "All right, once we get to the next town, Naruto, your help will be vital. One of the legends of the Rinnegan is that it can literally be used to see in all directions, correct?" Naruto nodded and said, "I noticed it with clones as I trained. If I close my eyes, I can use them as an extra pair of eyes. They become my personal cameras more or less. Only issue is, if I do it's disorienting if I use too many clones." Jiraiya nodded and the group raced off toward the next town. Sasuke on the other felt his anger grow as he remembered how easily he was beaten back in the exams. He felt weak. What the hell did that dead last do to get so strong? Those so-called eyes of God must be a shame. They must be. The Uchiha are the only ones with those kinds of eyes. He saw that Sakura was looking for him, so he decided to give her the slip, going after Naruto and the others. What none of the parties knew was that 2 cloaked individuals were tracking down a certain former blonde. They wore black cloaks with red clouds, one shorter than the other, with the taller one carrying a wrapped-up bundle with a handle on his back, showing it was a sword that was taller or at least as tall. The shorter one looked up from under his conical hat, showing black hair and red Sharingan eyes. Town outside Konoha. Naruto was sitting in the hotel room that Jiraiya had gotten for them so he could use clones to scour the city. With his eyes closed he was slowly using his clone sight to hopefully pin down Tsunade. Anko sat next to him on the bed, and she slowly hugged as she asked, "I know you might not answer me but, I just gotta ask. Out of all people you could have picked as a sensei, why did you pick me?" She saw he wasn't answering, no doubt helping Jiraiya and the others via his clones. She laid her head on his shoulder and he said, "Simple, the 2 of us. We're not so different. Like me, you're hated in that place because of a mark you never asked for. And you were betrayed by a person you thought you could trust. We're so much alike it's scary." Anko smiled, expecting that answer. Then Naruto said, "And besides, I keep hearing how sadistic you are, and if I was honest, I'd say I like that. You're one of the few women in that village that takes her profession seriously." Even though his eyes were occupied, Naruto still smiled, making Anko blush. Their moment was ruined as a knock came to the door, making Naruto get up and open it. He looked bored as he saw the cloaked figures and said, "So who ordered the fish fry with a side of emo? I knew this room service was gonna blow." Anko just looked at him as if he were nuts, while Kisame and Itachi merely stared. Naruto slammed the door in their faces, making Kisame ask, "Did that just happen?" Itachi merely replied, "It seems so." Naruto sighed as he said, "Who the hell were they? I know I didn't order any room service. Would have drained that pervert's wallet if I did." Anko just continued to stare at him, and a knock came to the door again. Naruto opened the door and asked, "Still here huh? What the hell do you want?" Itachi stared impassively as he said, "Naruto Uzumaki, we would like for you to come with us." Naruto scoffed and said, "Sorry. If you're trying to pass out Bibles I ain't interested." Itachi nearly looked confused as he said, "I have no idea what that meant, but this is a matter that concerns your tenant." This made Naruto's eyes grow wide, and Kisame merely said, hefting his sword as he did, "Why don't I cut off his legs Itachi? No doubt that will keep him from running." Naruto smirked and said, "I see your game, well then." Under his cloak, he reached for his pistol, careful not to let them see, until he shot at them from under the cloak, Itachi's Sharingan being the only thing that let him keep his skull intact. Kisame tried to swing Samahata down on Naruto's head, only for the arms of the Asura path to sprout up, stopping it, lightning coating the hands in an attempt to use the steel of the blade against Kisame. He didn't get the result he wanted, but he heard the sword screech. This made him stop. That sword is alive. He had to move as Itachi came at him with a kunai. He sent out a punch at the traitor Uchiha, causing a torrent of fire to fan out, shocking the missing nin. A fire technique. No, there was barely enough chakra for a spark, let alone that. Kai didn't notice the snakes grabbing him until it was too late, but he dispersed into a flock of crows before the snakes could bite down. Itachi noticed Naruto's eyes and thought, Zetsu was right, his eyes really like Pain-sama's. To think there could be more than one user of the Rinnegan. He then noticed that someone decided to crash the party. Sasuke. Kisame smirked as he stopped, and asked, well Itachi. Seems that one is a little peeved at you. Who is he? Itachi closed his eyes as he replied, he's my little brother. Naruto scoffed and said, what are you doing here Sasuke? The fact that you left the village like this, you're going to face some punishment. Sasuke ignored Naruto, focusing on Itachi. All these years, I've lived. I've fought, I've fled, I've survived. And in all that time, I've hated you. I grew out my hatred, just so I can kill you. He held out his left hand, a Chidori quickly forming as he rushed down the hall, his eyes focused on slaying his brother. He was an inch away before Itachi grabbed the wrist, and slammed it against the wall, stopping the jutsu, and Itachi casually snapped Sasuke's wrist, making the boy scream out in pain. Itachi then grabbed Sasuke by the neck, slamming him against the walls. Naruto made a move to help Sasuke, but Kisame held his sword out in front of him, blocking his path. Oh no you don't. Let's let the brothers fight this one out. Besides, we haven't finished our fight yet. Naruto snarled as he coated his hand in lightning, and charged at Kisame. Itachi forced Sasuke to look into his eyes, trapping him in the infamous Tsukuyomi, but not before whispering, do you know why you failed to kill me? It's because you lack hatred. To Itachi's surprise, the walls around them turning to flesh. Ninja art summoning, toad mouth trap. You two aren't going anywhere. Itachi, as did everyone else in the hallway, turned to see Jiraiya at the other end of the hall, his hands palm down on the floor. Showing he caused it. The Akatsuki, I wondered when you guys would start showing up. Naruto, holding Samahata to prevent it from coming down on his head, said, so not only are you late, but you didn't think to mention that a group was after me. Real fucking genius. Jiraiya scoffed and said, that's because I thought they wouldn't show up this soon. If I had known that I would have told you when we met. Then again an invasion was occurring at the time. Naruto rolled his eyes as Itachi tried to move to escape, causing the flesh hallway to react against him. Jiraiya chuckled and said, this is the stomach of MT. Myoboku's great fire toad. He has a very delicate stomach, so even the slightest movement could lead to you being digested. Enko noticed a drop landing on Kisami's cloak, making the part it landed on dissolve. Itachi twitched and said, we're leaving Kisame. Kisame looked at him and said, but why do we have to? We can take him. Itachi shook his head and said, Naruto is not only stronger than expected, but to handle a Sannin as well, not to mention the strongest, is simply a foolish thing, let's go. Itachi started to run down the hallway with Kisame following, with what looked like tentacles tying to grab at them before they could get away. As they reached the end, Itachi's eyes changed from the normal Sharingan as an explosion shook the hallway. Jiraiya and Naruto looked to see a hole blown into the wall through the toad's stomach. Around the edges was a strange black flame. Jiraiya kept the others CK as he sealed the flame away into a scroll for study. As soon as he put it away though, a green blur leapt through the wall, knocking Jiraiya on his ass as breaking his hold on the summon, causing it to return to its realm. Naruto started to laugh when he saw who it was. The green suit and bowl cut were too easy to remember. So, what brought you here Guy-sensei? Guy gave his patent grin as he said, I heard your new team was created and I decided to see you off. But then I noticed Sasuke leaving after you, so I followed him to see where he thought he was going. Naruto and Anko nodded. It made sense after all. Anko then said, well, you can take the brat back then. And tell that asshole of a sensei to keep a tighter leash on him. Guy sighed and nodded. Of course, it's hard to believe someone like Kakashi could fall so low. Naruto looked at Sasuke's unconscious form, giving it a glare. How pathetic. He clings to his hatred like a shroud. It's going to get him killed one day. Jiraiya nodded, as it reminded him a little too much like his old teammate. He then asked, was he always this bad? Naruto shook his head and said, he was an asshole, sure, this is starting to be borderline psychotic. No doubt after running into Orochimaru and getting the world's worst hickey would have that effect on someone. Kyuubi and the others entered the hallway. And they heard the part about Orochimaru, making her and Anko rub the back of their necks. Naruto noticed and had a single thought, I need to study seals more, make sure to get rid of that seal. Oh, but I can do that easily. Shocked, he listened to the dark force in his mind. That seal is powered by evil energy, I can absorb such a force. Naruto, seeing everyone looking at him, blushed and sheepishly chuckled. The lights dimmed, freaking out Jiraiya, but his heart nearly stopped when the creeper heads made their appearance, the snake-like appendages slithering near Anko and Kyuubi's cursed seals. The group watched in strange fascination as the creeper heads seemed to, for lack of a better term, suck in the foul chakra of the cursed seal. As the chakra was absorbed, the curse marks slowly faded, until they were gone altogether. Anko and Kyuubi looked at each other's neck, the shock not fully gone. Jiraiya couldn't help but giggle as the pair then proceeded to kiss the former blonde. Each taking turns, he almost broke out his notepad, but Karen grabbed it and gave the man a fierce glare, making him back away. The white-haired Sannin then turned to Guy and said, best do as the kid said. No doubt Tsunade is going to have a few things to do when we get her back. Guy looked at him wide-eyed, well, wider, at the mention of his female student's idol. So she'll be coming back to take the Hokage seat, I take it. Jiraiya nodded and said, but first we need to find her, and we can't do that standing around. So do take the Uchiha back, would you? Guy nodded and picked up Sasuke in a fireman's carry, using his infamous speed to race back to the village. Jiraiya then said, all right, let's get going before management shows up, I'm not paying for any of this. This caused the rest, even Jackie and the darkness, to mutter, stupid cheap-ass pervert. Tanzaku town 3 days later. After 3 days of scouring the local towns, Jiraiya got a tip that led them to Tanzaku town, Hino Kuni's biggest gambling town. Naruto wondered why they didn't check this place first, as the way Jiraiya described his old teammate, it sounded like this would be her version of heaven. Jiraiya had chuckled at that and told the group that Tsunade had the reputation of the worst luck possible, always racking up huge amounts of debt anywhere she went before running off to prevent paying for them. Naruto felt that if they ran into her, then things would not go smoothly. Oh, how right he was. Naruto sighed as he had his clones scour one hour of the town as he stopped to check a street, Kin and the others enjoying the festival that was occurring in the next street over with one of his clones. He then sensed a large chakra signature inside a bar. The sun setting slowly behind him as Kusanagi and Aotn appeared at his belt. He noticed Jiraiya heading into the same bar, and nearly slapped himself as he heard the pervert shout Tsunade's name for basically the whole street to hear. Naruto got behind Jiraiya and slapped him in the head, hard. You moron. Someone like Tsunade has people after her and you go and do that. Have some fucking common sense. Tsunade, being a little drunk, noticed his red hair and said, so what do I owe the pleasure of having this perv and his student near me? It's one big trip down memory lane. Jiraiya had the decency to chuckle as he said, well Tsunade, as you might not know, the village was recently attacked by our old friend Orochimaru. Tsunade instantly straightened her posture, something Naruto caught on. And Tsunade's assistant Shizune had a worried look on her face. Jiraiya continued, due to recent events, it's been proven that Sarutobi is no longer fit to serve as Hokage. Because of this, you, Tsunade, have been chosen to take up the position of Godime Hokage. Tsunade slammed down her cup of sake and said, forget it. There's no way I will go back to that village, or take the position of Hokage. The whole is nothing but a foolish dream. Shizune stared at her mentor in shock, and Anko and the others, who heard the noise, came running in to see it. Naruto stared at Tsunade and said, "What a fucking disappointment." Tsunade, still a little drunk, stood up and grabbed Naruto by his cloak, dragging him so he was right in her face as she said, "You mind repeating that, you little brat?" Naruto smirked and said, "Oh, I know you heard me, you old hag. You are a fucking disappointment. To think that a dried-up old prune like you was considered to take the Hokage spot." Jiraiya and Shizune made the others slowly back away, both knowing how bad Tsunade could get. "I mean, really, you're supposed to be the Shodime's granddaughter. What a load of shit. And even worse, you're supposed to be a Uzumaki thanks to Mito-sama. But all I see is a little bitch who moans and groans drinking her fucking life away. Hashirama-sama and M.I. Tosama must be rolling in their graves right now." Tsunade, having enough of his mouth, threw him outside into the dark street, causing some of the patrons to shake in fear. Jiraiya grimaced, noticing what Naruto was doing. He better be careful, Tsunade can knock his head off with a single punch. Karen was focusing on Tsunade, remembering that Naruto said that the older woman was indeed an Uzumaki. Naruto Koi better know what he's doing. I know Jiraiya told us of her past, but Naruto really knows how to target someone. Tsunade walked out into the street, a furious look on her face as she said, "I'm going to make you regret those words, kid. A little genin like you dealing with a Sannin. I'll only need one finger to put you in your place." Naruto started to laugh as he got up. "Put me in my place." Jackie was right, Uzumaki women must have a fetish for S&M. Mito-sama had him locked in a tiny container, and even my mother had him bound to a stone ball via chains. Fine then, come at me if you think you can. But you better use your whole fist." Tsunade blushed, and quickly was angrier than before, thinking Naruto was trying to be perverse and barely hearing him. She rushed right at him, fist raised back with the intent of knocking his head off. Naruto smirked as she got in close, a demon arm coming out from under his cloak and wrapping around her waist. The creeper head slithered out as well, and his eyes glowed yellow, making Tsunade tremble in fear. Naruto let a demented grin cross his face as he said, "Now what were you saying before?" "Ah yes, that you were going to put me in my place, right? Now who has who right where they want them, Tsunade looked on in fear as Naruto slammed her into the road, hard, leaving a dent in it. He then started to walk away. But not before saying, "You really are a disappointment. And to think that we're actually related." Tsunade had her eyes wide as she saw Naruto leave, Anko and the others leaving with him. Jiraiya shook his head and said, "You have no one to blame but yourself, Tsunade. We are going to need to have a long talk about you and your godson." The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.